So today, I have so much to talk about, but today is about anti-Semitism. I'm going to be talking about different aspects of anti-Semitism from different areas, right? So I'm going to, first of all, talk about anti-Semitism in Twitch and anti-Semitism in this Twitch politics space that I'm weirdly a part of, even though I don't think I'm very political. I mean, there's no Twitch history space, which I would love to create. I would love to create like a Twitch history or a Twitch education space that definitely would fit me much more than Twitch politics. But I'm going to be talking about that, and I'm going to be talking about streamers. I'm going to be calling out people, and I'm going to be saying names. Again, when I say those names, I am not calling for the harassment of those people. And something that I'm going to hope to argue in this, right, is that instead of targeting specific people, I'm bringing up names for the sake of transparency, right? But instead of targeting specific people, focus instead on the system that has created those types of people and normalized it. We focus so much on just hating individuals for their racism or anti-Semitism, and we forget how much that shit is embedded in our society. So that's what I want. So please do not harass those people. Okay? If anything, I encourage you to slowly try to educate them, slowly try to bring them constructive and calm criticism, while you're enjoying their content. Most of the people that I'm going to bring up, save for maybe one, I think actually has good content. Now that's one thing. I'm also going to talk about the term anti-Semitism and where it comes from. I'm also, which is really interesting because the term itself is complicated. It's got a complicated history and it's controversial, right? So it's interesting to use, and I don't like the term, and I'm going to argue why I think we should change it. Something else that I'm going to talk about, let's open, is I'm going to talk about the history of anti-Semitism and how much it's embedded in our current society. Because in reality, we're still very much inheriting these old ideas that kind of go back to, old medieval anti-Semitism. I'm going to talk about early, ancient anti-Semitism, though I don't know if I would even call it that, but it's kind of the beginning of it. And just the different forms that anti-Semitism often can take and how you can see it. And I'm also going to talk about my own experiences of anti-Semitism. And I'm going to be talking to other Jews, other Jewish streamers as well, about their experiences. And if you have an interesting story, I would also love to hear it. So I'll have a section where you can come to the waiting room and I can hear and listen. You can tell your story. I'm going to be talking about my own experiences. And then I'm also going to talk about what I think you can do and what people who are allies and want to do. Because there are so many people who contact me when, I think a lot of people saw my tweets. And I'll show you guys them. And I was not happy. For those who don't know, there was a hostage situation on Saturday where a bunch of Jews were taken hostage in a synagogue. And the whole day during the hostage situation, very few people talked about it. There were some mentions, brief articles on the news, but it wasn't, no one in Twitch politics talked about it. No one in lefty circles. I never saw anything on Twitter. There was in the left world, it was just not being talked about whatsoever. And that's the world I usually operate in. So it was very upsetting because I really felt if it had been another group, if it had been another group for a target for a hate crime, people had been talking about it. And it just got me really, I don't know what other word to use, but triggered. And I got really emotional about it. So I was tweeting stuff and I was angry and I wanted to wait. Did Lance talk about it? I didn't know about that. But yeah, the New York Times actually only sent out a push notification about it. There started to be a lot of response of people being frustrated with the lack of coverage of the situation, especially the lack of global coverage. There was nothing on the CBC, which is the Canadian BBC, or the BBC. And so by the end of the day, there was people responded to the criticism, so they started putting out articles out and push notifications. Considering that there have been other instances that have gotten more coverage, it's weird that there was nothing like this. Yeah, but this is a common thing with a lot of when I talk to people about about anti-Semitism, they often think that I am just complaining. And I honestly cannot blame them, because it sounds like I'm just complaining, because you just never hear about it. It's so rare that you see movies talking about this issue. When you see movies talking about it, it's always the Holocaust, right? When that's just like it's a major blip, but it's one blip. When there's such a long history of it, and there's such a resurgence of it. If I were to tell you right now that the most common hate crime in the United States, which is actually where Jews are probably the most privileged out of any other Jewish group in the rest of the world, right? And even in that country, right, the most common hate crime is not against any other group but Jews. Like, statistically, look it up. It's just a statistical fact. And people are totally shocked because you just don't see social movements and those social movements for Black people or for trans people or for Muslims, those things are 100% needed and deserved, right? Like, Islamophobia is disgusting. Like, homophobia and racism and all these things are significantly real issues. But you do wonder, like, why do so few people talk about, like, Jewish issues? Because it really gives this very false impression that anti-Semitism is this small thing. And I think that, I think it's because, people maybe see, look at economics, that Jews do well, which is also a misconception, right? And like many other groups, there are very, very wealthy, and there are also people who are not doing well. I think, it's also, the way Jews are often portrayed in Hollywood, often, as jokes and wealthy and stuff like that, when statistically that's often not the case. The biggest reason why people don't take anti-Semitism seriously is because Jewish people can benefit from white privilege. Oh, I mean, I don't know if that's okay. I do think the latter is true. That Jewish people of European descent, particularly Ashkenazi Jews, who are not the most common Jews, by the way, but that they can benefit from white privilege for sure, right? But so can Black people that don't look very Black, right? So can plenty of other groups that, that visually fit in, right? I think I benefit from white privilege even though I'm mixed Asian. So, so to me, there's got to be more to the story than that, right? There's got to be more to the story. It seems like the only time there's Jewish representation in media that's not historical, it's made by rich Jews talking about their life so wealthy. Jews is all they talk about. Yeah, no, that is very, very, very true. I actually read a really fantastic article on how Jewish writers often portray other Jews. And it's interesting that we focus so much on diversity in the writer's room, when in reality, sometimes when you get those people in the writer's room, they don't actually serve their quote unquote own people correctly, right? They end up portraying ourselves as jokes. And I find that Jewish culture and stuff is often played for laughs. It's a very common thing. But if I were to tell the people in my audience, okay, that a year and a half ago, there was literally a group of people hunting Jews in New York City and stabbing them, right? And they successfully stabbed multiple people, killing one, right? But they stabbed plenty of people, and they even bombarded and invaded a house and stabbed them constantly. And stabbing attacks are still a regular issue in New York City for Jews, right? You'd probably be really surprised. Be like, wait, what? Jewish people are literally being hunted in New York City, right? And this is a regular thing that happens, and that a bunch of people died because of it? You'd probably be shocked. That never made the news. Yeah, and and again, honestly, it's usually the Jewish people in my chat that are yeah, we know. Because it was obviously known within Jewish circles. And as Jews, we've known that this has been on the upstart crazy recently. And the way the coverage, the media, and I don't blame people, because we're also susceptible to the media. I it makes me so angry at the media for how little they cover it and how little importance they put on it. I'll give you an example. So a few weeks ago, there was a bus, there was like it was a month ago, I think, for Hanukkah, where there was a bunch of Orthodox Jews. They were on the bus, and this is in London, the UK. And they were celebrating, dancing for Hanukkah, doing the thing that people do when they celebrate on like this happy bus, I guess. And a bunch of people, right, started spitting at them and yelling nasty Islamic, what do you call it? What's the word? Anti-Semitic words, right? Like yelling at them in Arabic. And when the BBC translated the Arabic, right, that they used, right, they translated the word Yahud, and anyone who speaks Arabic here will know this is true. The word Yahud, right, means Jew. But they translated the word to mean Israeli. Big difference, right? And so when they published this, when they published this story, and they still, to this day, have not corrected this article, right? They still have not corrected this. So, and you see this a lot in mistranslations in general, right? Where they said that the people that were yelling at them, right, and started spitting at them, they started throwing things. I forget like all the details, but it was like this nasty event in the city of London. Is that it was like a disagreement on Zionism. That was how the article was written, right? Where one group was like pro-Israel and the other group was being anti-Israel. That's not what happened, right? That is just not what happened. That group was not being like so-called pro-Israel. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they had a Jewish star or something like around. They were just celebrating Hanukkah. There were Orthodox Jews celebrating Hanukkah, maybe being a little bit loud, I have no clue. And then the bus gets attacked. Someone tries to get on the bus too and stab them. I forget. I think it was stab them. Correct me if I'm wrong. I might be wrong about the stabbing, but they were trying to get on the bus too. But so when they portray this and when they tell the story in the media, it's like, oh, like there was just some violence relating to Israel, right? That's not what happened. When those people were screaming, harassment and death to, it said death to Israelis. No, they were saying death to Jews. And it's like, and there are just so many instances like that happen. And this is the BBC. Like, this is not like an extreme, we're not talking about some like extreme leftists. We're talking about like a mainstream news here. Even if they were being anti-Zionist, it would be anti-Jewish to assume every Jewish is Israeli Zionist. Yes, no, exactly. And there are also plenty of Orthodox Jews that are anti-Zionists, right? So that's why it's really important to denote that, like, the fact that they said Yahud, right? Not Israeli. Just an important difference. And it just shows, like, how much you can hear about something reported on the news and how just like little changes can really change the framing. And I think, like, yes, I totally agree that you can be like critical of Israel and despise what Israel does to the Palestinians and not be anti-Semitic. 100%. Right? And yes, I do think that criticism of Israel is often dismissed. Legitimate criticism of Israel is dismissed all the time as anti-Semitism, and those people fucking drive me crazy when they do that, because then it makes, when I call that shit out and I think it's being legit, it makes people treat it like a joke. And that's very, very frustrating, because like the truth is that it is used in plenty of instances that way, and I just wish people would take it seriously when I brought that shit up. I think something else that you notice specifically when it comes to how we target the type of so-called anti-Zionism that is anti-Semitism, right? And I want to repeat, not all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, but something that I do see is how often people use the actions of Israel's government and put it on its people. right? Or put it on the existence of the entire country itself. And it's something that I just don't see with other countries. Very rarely. It's very rare. Like, you look at China and its human rights record. There's plenty of great things about China. Don't get me wrong, right? But there's also lots of shit. I mean, they funded a genocide they fund genocides regularly in Africa, most infamously the Darfur genocide in 2004. Like, and then on top of that, there's the Uyghur situation, right? There's how they treat their own citizens. There's like plenty of things, right? There's tons of issues with China, as there are with lots of other countries, right? And I do think sometimes people criticize China because they're just being racist, right? Trump, right? And but there's also legitimate criticisms of China, like the ones I mentioned, and I'm sure there are plenty that I haven't thought of. But it's just so rare that I see people think like, oh, like, because of the shitty actions of the Chinese government, I want to boycott any academic from China. I want to boycott any Chinese exchange student. I want to go, I'm going to ban this Chinese person from my group because they're Chinese. And those are things that have happened to me. I joined a Palestinian rights group because I am against the occupation. And I was against the blockade. And I wanted to find ways to try to convince Israelis to be more empathetic to Palestinians. And I thought that I could be a great voice for that. And I had recently, it was in my undergrad, I had recently learned about what had happened to Palestinians during the Nakba, right? And I was just like young and excited to do my part, right? And when they saw my last name, and my last name is Jewish, it's very visibly Jewish. When they saw my last name, they asked me if I was Israeli, and I said I was born there. And they said, do you renounce the country of your birth? And I said, I disagree with the actions of the government, right? And then they kicked me out. I don't see how that can like be anything other than they didn't ask anyone else there if they were Israeli, right? They didn't ask anyone else there if they were born there, right? It was just me. And I got kicked out. Like, she literally erased my name from the list. And this is like a very frustrating, it's been a common experience for a lot of Jews who have tried to participate in the pro-Palestine movement or have tried to help do their part, right? And it's like, yeah, and there's so much anti-Semitism. In fact, some Jews go so far as the thing that I've said before. I've seen them on Twitter and I've seen them in real life, right? Where they're like, I understand why you're anti-Semitic, okay? It's okay. I get it. We deserve it. We deserve it, right? For what we've done to you. No, fuck that. No one deserves it. No one deserves, like, any fucking hate. You never deserve to be treated like shit for the actions of someone else. If you are treated for the actions of someone else, of something that you didn't do yourself, that's called bigotry. Aren't Jewish people, if you look at the stats, far and away the biggest recipients of hate crimes even today? Yes, they are, right? I'm actually surprised you know that, Cervantes. That's impressive that you know that. Very few people know that. And there have been so many attacks like lately. It's crazy, and it's just so rare that they make the news. And then there was like this hostage situation. And hostage situations in general are just like big news. And they're big news because they're ongoing, right? Like, people love to put on their television, watch the outcome of the hostage. They would love to see there's like an entertainment value in it, which is gross, but it's true. And the fact that there was just such little coverage, particularly in lefty spaces, was just absolutely wild. And then, like, CNN did cover it. And there was if you guys know, there's a newscaster named Don Lemon. Oh, yes, people did defend the hostage situation, arguing that the synagogue was Zionist. And and that because the synagogue supports Israel, it's like was an act of anti-Zionism to do what they did. Yeah, oh yeah, I saw that everywhere, like lots of places. Thankfully, I didn't see that from any streamers. But yeah, it was pretty liked by like thousands of people on Twitter. And a lot of those people have like, and I reported so much of this shit, and then Twitter kept saying, we didn't find anything hateful in these remarks. Something that you'll see like and if you're just new, I was talking about the BBC issue of when they told the story of an incident of anti-Semitism in London. They mistranslated the Arabic of Yehud, which translates to Jew, and they instead translated to Israeli and Israel. This way, it looked much more like an anti-Zionist incident than an anti-Semitic incident. Last year, there was also an incident where there were just a bunch of Jewish people eating in Los Angeles. Pretty sure it was Los Angeles. And a group of people, and at the time there was that renewed, this was around April last year, and there was like a renewed violence in Gaza and in Jerusalem, if you guys remember. And so a group of people saw them and just attacked them and started beating them up. Now take a wild guess which side Twitter took, as these guys were saying anti-Semitic shit. These were just a group of Jews. They weren't IDF soldiers. They were just like eating dinner in Los Angeles, right? Wow, no way they sided against Jews. Yeah, well, they're like, oh, like this was like a, we have no right to tell like Palestinians how they protest against Zionism, right? Like, or we have like, or like this is a criticism. This is just like, like they have a right to take up arms against their oppressors. Like shit like this, like just, it's kind of like where they take like lefty rhetoric that you often see used and then they use it against Jewish people. I even saw a mod of the Serfs. I'm not going to say their name. The Serfs can contact me. Lance could contact me if he wants. But I don't want to say their name because I don't want to inspire any harassment towards them. But even like a mod of theirs tweeted that the Jews basically deserved what happened, like in that group, right? Because of all the violence, that they couldn't blame Palestinians for doing what they did, for attacking some Jews in Lynch. So, granted, I don't think Lance knows about this incident, by the way. So, just want to call that out. So like, and I've seen this kind of rhetoric used regularly on Prime panels. I mean, recently on Prime panels, there've literally been Nazis on there. So, to my knowledge. I just don't think that Lance realizes. The thing is, I've seen Lance stand up against anti-Semitism enough to give him the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, I definitely disagree with him platforming Abby Martin for her history. And for sure bad empanada. But I have a feeling he doesn't get along with him anymore. Just a wild take, but I'm not sure. But anyways, there's also Vosh has been accused of anti-Semitism, and I think there's been some and like I like Vosh a lot, and Vosh has actually been a pretty good support system for me as a new streamer. I didn't find a clip of doing me, but Vosh has also been accused, and I think he's had some pretty legitimate criticism, particularly with the rhymes with Bath, Israel comment. And if you notice, I think Vosh has been much more toned down with how he's critical of Israel, much more careful with his language. He's actually talking about how he's watched my content and appreciated it, and he's like learned about it. And so I actually think he's really, really improved on his rhetoric. I saw some of the recent clips, and I'm interested. I need to watch like all of them in whole as a way to judge them. But I'm pretty sure he got clip jumped, but we'll kind of see for that. You're brave for talking about this. You're the only person I see who talks about this topic. Thanks. Novova, thank you for saying that. Seriously. I can't even tell you how much hate I get every day for A, being Jewish, and B, talking about it, and C, not toting the line on, like, because we're mostly in lefty spaces, I think people expect me to only criticize anti-Semitism when I see it on the right. Because that's the thing that people do in team sports. And that's what, like, this political world is, right? You only want to, you don't want to shit on it when your side does it, right? You only want to shit on the right-wingers does it, because it's not really about anti-Semitism. It's just about getting a dunk on them. But someone who actually criticizes anti-Semitism on either side, and yes, it exists on the left, and yes, it's really bad on the left. And I'm tired of being pushed to downplay it or act like, oh no, only the serious anti-Semitism on the right. No, they're both dangerous. And when people tell me that, oh, right-wing anti-Semitism is more dangerous, you know what? Like, the stabbings and the calls to violence, they happen by left-wingers too. I genuinely think it's 50-50. I'd be interested to see the numbers, right? Because I don't think there's any numbers of people collected left versus right anti-Semitism. But I can tell you, I know for me, judging just anecdotally, for me and the experiences that I've had with anti-Semitism, and I mean, I'm kind of seen as like the Jew symbol in this sphere, right? I think that the type of anti-Semitism that I get is primarily from the left. So if I were to just judge it anecdotally, I say it's like almost all lefties, except for like 10%. But I know that wouldn't be honest because I normally only interact with lefties. It's pretty rare that I interact with righties. So, and just by nature, this Twitch politics is just covered in lefties. So just naturally, I'm mostly going to be interacting with people on the left. So I think it makes sense that I would mostly experience. So like, this just doesn't make sense to judge it that way. I feel like left and right anti-Semitism is pretty different. Happy to discuss this on stream. Yeah, no, I do think they're different. But I think they're both dangerous. I think like there's like this idea that it's like lefty anti-Semitism is not dangerous because they don't have power. It's like, bro, as long as you can put a knife in your hands, you've got power. Like, tell the people who've been stabbed to death that that person was a Black Hebrew Israelite, so they didn't have power. Like, that shit is the most terminally online shit I've ever heard in my life. Did you see these TikTokers hand-waving anti-Semitic motives for the Texas shul situation? Let's check this out.
Is where a suspect has reportedly taken some people hostage inside a synagogue, including the rabbi.
So currently the terrorist is holding the synagogue hostage with plastic explosives, and he has one demand, and I don't know if it's unreasonable. The terrorist wants her sister, Afia Siddiqui, released from federal prison. So, who is Afia Siddiqui?
Why did... The fact that this person immediately posts this, right? And I saw this was so common. Like, let's look at what the person wants and defend them. Right? Let's not look at why are we looking at this person that's in prison? Why are we not looking at the people that are currently being imprisoned unjustly? Right? What's crazy about that story is that the person that they were trying to get freed, this Aziki, I forget her name, she wasn't being imprisoned by Israel. You would think that because like they attacked the synagogue for anti-Zionism, right? That the person like was being imprisoned by, no, it should bring imprisoned by the United States. Am I correct? I'm pretty sure it was in the United States. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. And so just think of the type of logic, like I know this is hard, guys, because you're all fantastic people, but put yourself in the mind of this terrorist. And that's what they are. So put yourself in this mind of this anti-Semitic terrorist, right? And think. Your sister is imprisoned, right? And you think that she's in prison unjustly. It's not true, but you think so. And so and you go and protest. You don't go to the American consulate, right? You don't go to, I don't know, to like Times Square, right, where you're going to get tons of news coverage. You go to a Jewish synagogue thinking that some random Jewish synagogue is going to free your sister. Like, the only way that you can come to that conclusion is if you legitimately think that Jews run the world. Right? Because if Jews run the world, in this guy's head, not only that, the terrorist had the rabbi call another rabbi in New York. So that's exactly what I'm saying. You have to legitimately believe that there is a full-on Jewish conspiracy, Jewish Israeli Zionist conspiracy to rule the world, right? And that they have that much power that they can get the United States to a foreign government to release your sister. It seems so crazy, but this is the core, but this idea is actually so common. And it's the core idea behind tons of anti-Semitism. It's kind of wild when you put it that way, right? So we'll continue with this person.
For the record, her nickname is Lady Al-Qaeda, but don't let the name fool you. Afia is actually a neuroscientist and an MIT graduate, the daughter of a Pakistani doctor. Here's where the stories diverge. So according to the Pakistani government, Afia is actually a scapegoat for the war on terror during 9/11. She was actually the one that was kidnapped in 2003, raped by US soldiers and separated from her children. The US authorities say a different story. The FBI was actually the organization that put Afia on the world's most wanted list across Interpol. They're also the ones that claimed that Afia got radicalized by Al-Qaeda after the 9/11 attacks and had schematics for dirty bombs. Currently, Afia is serving 86 years in prison for the attempted murder of an army captain, but the details of her arrest are kind of sketch. So according to the US authorities, Siddiqui lunged at an interpreter, disarmed a US soldier, took a rifle, and fired 2 shots at the army captain. But she didn't hit anything. Meanwhile, she was disarmed by the army captain with a shot to her torso and her head. Just an FYI, she's being held at Federal Medical Center at Carswell.
So this guy just spent 1 minute and 30 seconds, okay, which is very long in the TikTok world, okay, discussing a woman who is imprisoned, right? And we're not gonna talk about rightly or wrongly right now. We'll discuss it after. During a hostage crisis, let's look at the reasons of why, why they got taken, right? And what was so crazy was on Twitter, the most common thing that I was seeing was not solidarity with the victims, right? That you would normally see, or thoughts and prayers, or the normal shit that people say during these events, okay? Like thoughts and prayers with the Jews, so like the Jewish community, my heart's out to you, or something like that. The majority of the shit that I saw, and this is totally anecdotal, but if there are Jews in chat, you can tell me if I'm totally insane, but this is what I was seeing trending on Twitter. Majority of the shit I saw was talking about Islamophobia. That when the few people that noticed the incident that wanted to talk about it, they were like, guys, there's going to be a huge side effect of Islamophobia after today. That's the real issue. So let's talk about Islamophobia, all right? Now, remember, our hearts are out to all our Muslim brothers and sisters, with the type of Islamophobia they are going to be faced as a consequence of this event. Now, I agree. There's probably going to be some Islamophobia as a consequence, right? Hate often begets hate, and it's disgusting. And Islamophobia is a huge issue in the United States and around the world. So 100% stand up against Islamophobia. It's disgusting. And I talk about a lot on my channel about the history of Islamophobia and all the issues associated with it. But Dude, not the fucking time. The fact that your instinct is first to go, like, what does that say about you as a person? That you see an incident targeting Jews. It's like you see a bunch of white people, okay, chase down Ahmaud Arbery, right? Because he's black, and kill him. And then Richard Spencer comes on. And I was like, hey, so there's going to be a lot of white hate today, guys. There's going to be a lot of white hate. I don't want to talk about the black man that just got killed, right? Or how unsafe the black community probably feels right now. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the potential fallout from people who might be associated with the perpetrators. Dude, not the fucking time. It's like, just know I just don't understand why it's so hard for people to just like have sympathy and just say simply, fuck. My heart goes out to the Jewish community. They're probably really scared. And honestly, that's what's happened. It's the same thing that happened when there have been attacks on mosques. That also happen regularly. What happens when a mosque gets attacked, right? What happened after the New Zealand attack at that mosque? Muslims became terrified to go to mosque. They became terrified. It became an act of courage to go pray, right? They became terrified to congregate. They felt like their country didn't want them. And that's exactly how Jews feel in a similar situation, right? So, absolutely wild. It's just like the fact that your mind just goes to that initially. When I can't even tell you, like, it's really scary. And Jews never, like any group, and I'm sure like the Muslims here agree, like, and if there are any Muslims to chat, right? I'm sure you experience Islamophobia regularly, especially if you're visibly Muslim, like with a beard, or I know that there have been like other examples of there was actually last year there was a Islamophobic attack in London, Ontario, in Canada, and afterwards a bunch of my Muslim friends were terrified, and some of them were even considering like literally shaving off their beard. Right? Because like they get scared. That's the purpose of these attacks. They want to make people scared, and it's very effective because it works. And so it's like, I just want some empathy sometimes about like that if someone gifts me a beautiful Jewish lead necklace, I'm not fucking wearing that outside, bro. I'm not wearing that outside. There have been too many anti-Semitic incidents in my city. I'm not doing it. And maybe some of the Jews in chat are going to be like, no, be proud. Fuck, you know what? I'm not risking my life. And, like, that's kind of the kind of shit that these incidents do. They make people really scared. And, like, I just don't get, like, why people just don't... The minute I hear about any kind of terror attack or hate attack against any group, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Like people in that community are going to feel scared. Like, how do I help them? How do I make them feel safe? How do I use whatever privilege I have in that incident to try to help them? And it was frustrating. And it was hurtful that the same thing wasn't afforded to Jews, that I often see the left give to so many other groups. Rightly give to other groups. Yeah, I guess it was envy. And I think that made me jealous. Like, it just made me like fuck. I personally choose to wear kippah outside, but I'm also 5'11", 190 dude. I totally get why people don't wear. Honestly, like, you wearing kippah outside, I literally think it's brave. I think like anyone who visibly can kind of they can benefit from white privilege, or they can again, there are some friends I know that are Muslim, and if they don't have their beard or something like that, then they kind of like fit in and they look white. And they just look like a white Christian average person. And I think them keeping their beard is an act of bravery, right? And I don't know if I would do the same. I don't think I would. Empathy on the internet? What's empathy? Dude, I know. Yeah, you should stop being scared. The rabbi always talked about the only appropriate response to anti-Semitism is pride and growth. Yeah, I just don't. I don't know. I get that's the right thing to do, but as individuals, we care primarily about safety. So it's like the right thing after 9/11 was to be like, oh, look, we don't care, blah, blah, blah. But like the truth is people stopped going out or working at tall buildings and all that. I'm an ex-Muslim, but I've been the subject to some Islamophobia. It's rare though. Yeah, it depends on like how visually quote-unquote Muslim you were. And it's the same thing with Jews. I'm recently changing my surname because of the anti-Semitism that I've received as a consequence of my surname. Because I don't physically look what people imagine someone who's Jewish looks like because I'm mixed race. So I am like, so that's like the one thing that really ties, unless I'm wearing a Jewish star or something, like that's the one thing that really visually ties me to being Jewish just in everyday life. So I'm personally changing my name. Hijabs get it the worst. One of my hijab cousins was verbally attacked in a movie theater last month. Yeah, I've seen that in person. But yeah, I'll tell you guys, I've experienced the majority of anti-Semitism that I've experienced has been in the last 6 months online. Which I don't want to say it's like, I don't want to downplay it because it's shit. But I was prepared for it. As prepared as one can be. Considering the anti-Semitism has been pretty severe. But I was prepared for it because I knew if I was going to be an online public figure and I was going to be primarily talking about Israel and Palestine and Jewish issues and history, that because I was going to be very visibly Jewish, I was going to become like kind of like a symbol for that, like in these groups. So I understood that. It's been worse than I expected, but and I'm learning to deal with it. It's like, but like the stuff that happens in person, that's the scariest. Like, and I don't know, I can't speak for the other Jews in chat, but that's how it's felt for me. Because I don't know about you guys, but I am 5'2", I am tiny. I am a physically tiny person. And I'm physically weak. And if like, I'm very aware, and almost all the incidents that happened to me that were anti-Semitic in person were done by men. So there's like another element there of them being much more physically stronger than me. And also like a lot of the anti-Semitism I've experienced both online and real life also like overlaps with me being a woman. And it's something that no one warned me about. Like I always learned about anti-Semitism as being like a thing that just happens to everyone, and it does. It happens to men all the time. But like I've never heard about like misogynistic anti-Semitism. Like I've never heard about that. Maybe I'm just super uneducated on the subject, but it's something that I've been kind of shocked by. Like the amount of how much it overlaps. So I'll tell you guys a story. I was at a party. One of the few times I went outside, right? Yeah, I was outside, all right? And actually the party gets so hot and heavy and intense that I literally go outside. And back then I smoked cigarettes. It's a terrible, disgusting habit. Don't ever do it, right? And so I was outside and I actually wore a Jewish star. Back in as my ignorant self, okay? And so I go outside and I'm having a smoke, right? And being antisocial, as one does. And I see this guy throwing up. Right? He's like out like on like the front of the lawn, like near the road, and he's just barfing it up. Like he's sick. He's bent over. He's super sick. And my motherly instinct kicked in, and I was like, oh my God, I have to go help him. Right? So I run over to him. I put my hand on his back. I'm like, hey, are you okay? And he's like, and he like could barely respond. And I'm like, okay, we got to get you like some food. So I walked him to the nearby Tim Hortons. I bought him like a donut so he could get some, I don't know, like carbs or something in his system to absorb some of the alcohol. I don't know if that's a myth, but that was what I was taught. And like, so I helped him out, and I like kind of pushed his hair back because he had like long hair while he was throwing up. And he starts feeling better, and we start chatting, right? And he's pretty chill, and he's like, you know, thanks for helping me out and everything like that. I was like, of course, right? And anyways, like he decides that, so we figure he should probably go home and rest. So, and he lived nearby, so I was like, okay, like I'll walk you back, right? And it was like it's like a downtown neighborhood, so it was all really active and alive around. So I didn't feel like I would be alone or sketched out or something. So I walk him back, and he's feeling a lot better. And before he goes in, right, he leans over to me, okay, and tries to kiss me. Yes, that's how I met my husband, okay? But yeah, he leans over to me and tries to kiss me. And guys, I had just spent an hour watching this guy puke his guts out, okay? You know how disgusting vomit smells? You guys know that smell? The alcohol vomit? Okay? You guys know that smell. Everyone here knows that. You know what I'm talking about. It's disgusting. So he leans over and he tries to kiss me. And I immediately push him away, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, like I'm just, he's a good looking guy, but I just seen him thrown up. Wasn't exactly the most attractive thing. Like, and so I was like, sorry, like I'm just not, you know, I'm not interested. And I should probably be getting back. Because I just realized in that moment, I'm this tiny girl with this guy who looks like maybe 5'11", 6'1", I don't know. He's much taller than me. And probably not a good idea. Like, and the minute I reject him, his face completely changes. Like, completely changes. And he looks at me with like the biggest look of disgust, and he says, okay, you fucking uptight, like, bitch. And then he says the word that rhymes with bike that I can't say right now. I almost wish I could say it just so I can express like how much animosity. It was the first time I'd ever been called that word in person. All right. It rhymes with bike. Starts with a K. It's used very rarely. And because it's used rarely, it packs a punch, right? And he almost spit at me, right? And I almost thought he was gonna punch me, like right there. You got called Mike from PA. I almost didn't know that people called each other the K word at the time, like anymore. I thought that was like a done slur, but he knew it. Yeah, it's not the D word, okay? It's the K word. And anyways, okay. And anyways, like, I ended up, like, and I just, like, backed off. And I just, like, left. I just, like, ran away. Right? Because he, like, freaked me the fuck out. This, like, after that, I was like, I don't know if I want to wear my Jewish star necklace at parties anymore. It's like, why? Why do I need to add that shit to my life? What is up with dudes who burst out slurs when they get rejected? Toxic masculinity, hell of a drug, yeah. And some of the stuff that I get, some of the type of hate that I get is honestly like 90% of it. Okay, now 70% of it is interlaced with misogyny. It's something that's like super weird. So when I say misogyny, like I don't mean like some like light shit. I mean like people telling me in detail how they're going to rape me. And there was even a streamer, and I don't want to say their name because I don't want to give them more attention. But they literally tweeted how Israelis were going to be like raped by Palestinians. And the joy that he would take in seeing that. And what's funny is I found out about that tweet by someone who is Arabic and Muslim themselves, who was disgusted at Palestinians and Palestinian bodies being used for this person's sick fantasies. Yeah, no, it wasn't Destiny. Like, there's this weird, like, overlap of some misogyny when it comes to this shit. So, like, I want to show, like, do I have a screenshot of something like this? I'm just going to, just to show some of the anti-Semitism, types of anti-Semitism I get. Like, this is just a regular day. And I have every right to show this. It's according to Twitch rules. I looked it up. So don't even bother reporting it. This is just a typical stuff that I will get. You know. Egged on by some streamers. If you can't see this, I'll read it out for you. Where he calls me a racist, ignorant, ironic, Yehudi, piece of shit, pig shit, inbred Jew. You are a scum, a racist who LARPs as a fair person. As if you have no voice. I don't know what that means. And then that brings up this random issue, like, of when I had to demod someone who was Turkish years ago. So it might be them. And like, I remember being in VC with you and I masturbated to your voice while you talked to other girls. I am a brown South Asian. And stop being a pig, you piece of shit. Also, guess who contributed to the instigation of Anna Frills to attack you? So as long as I am unfairly banned, the incitement will likely continue. Plenty of people in the server aren't fans of yours. This is just some of the stuff that I can just show you, because there's some stuff that I can't show you. A lot of things that I get sent involve like actual, like literally like actual pictures, graphic pictures of like Holocaust imagery, things like that. Just day-to-day stuff. There's also a lot of anti-Semitism when it comes to the history of just like how we're taught about like the history of the region of Israel. There's especially people seeing all Israelis, all Jewish Israelis, as European colonizers is a complete misunderstanding of history. The majority of Jewish Israelis are not even originally from Europe. And the majority of them are actually what are called Mizrahi Jews. You don't see Mizrahi Jews they're not as common in the United States, so a lot of people don't know about them in American popular culture. But they're actually one of the most common types of Jews in Israel, and they are natively from the Middle East, just like anyone else. They were kicked out of their countries, from Iraq to Morocco to plenty of countries, to Yemen. Okay, the serfs chat is going very badly. This is actually insane how the community reveals itself. Wait, what about the serfs? So random. Well, honestly, Lance from the serfs, right? I disagree with him on some stuff with like platforming Abby and stuff, but like overall, again, I give him more leniency because he's called out anti-Semitism more than I've seen other people. So like, yeah, he gets justified points for that. So I don't know. I don't know if people are trying to start some like weird war, but that's not happening. If there is a streamer that I am going to call out fully for anti-Semitism, and this is not a license to go harass them. Please do not go harass them. The streamer that I'm going to call out fully, right, is Bad Bunny. So Bad Bunny, right, has literally, first of all, she only like approves of Jews or allows Jews that have completely like that have won themselves over for her, like by being incredibly like so anti-Israel that I guess like they're one of the good ones. And she also justified, right, and argued that the terrorist organization Hamas, which is genocidal and anti-Semitic in its charter and in its goals, right? This is an objective fact, right? She argued that of all the terrorist organizations, that's the one, right? That's the one, that's the one that might require us to reconsider whether or not terrorism is okay, right? Like that's literally what she said, and she has not lost her platform. How insane is that? And yeah, it's okay because Hamas, if you hear that Hamas has changed their charter, this is a misconception. This is a misconception. So Hamas, right, has not changed their charter. What they have changed, okay, is they changed their, They added a new aspect. They added a new charter, but they didn't remove the old one. And they did this for PR purposes. Now, if you ask any of the leadership in Hamas, they still officially go by their original charter. This is an objective fact, okay? And anyone trying to tell you that's not true is lying. Now, some of those people are lying to you because they've just been given the wrong information, like by Abby, whatever her name is. But some people are telling it because they're purposely trying to legitimize Hamas. Hamas has never, ever, never gone back on their original charter. They've never removed it. They still follow it. The original charter literally calls for killing every Jew they see. It is so and it's fucking wild to me that they will say that what Israel does to Palestinians is a genocide, which I disagree with. I think what they're doing is awful to Palestinians, but it's not a genocide. That is not and there's nothing in the Israeli charter that's calling for the death of Palestinians, right? In Hamas, it's literally calling for that. And so the fact that people will call Israel genocidal and they won't call Hamas there can be no other reason than you are either ignorant or just a fucking Jew hater. That's just wild. When it comes to streamers, I feel like most are not anti-Semitic and those are universally hated. Bad Bunny, or do you get similar vibes from other streamers like Bad Bunny? I think streamers that I've seen do things that I consider anti-Semitic. I think in general, and this is what I said from the beginning, is that I think when they engage in that, I think it's because our society in general is anti-Semitic, and they repeat and engage in tropes that they've learned and they think are facts, and they're engaging with them because they think they're facts, not because they see them as Jew hatred. So it's like when someone participates in something that's racist, or participates in a racist trope and they don't realize it actually comes from racism, right? It's mostly out of ignorance. And this is one of my purposes of streaming, to show the anti-Semitic origins of a lot of these ideas. The frustrating thing in these lefties infantilizing Palestinians as some children that can't make decisions for themselves. Well, I understand why lefties advocate for the Palestinian cause. I think 100%. 100% what's happening to the Palestinians right now and the situation they're in is awful. It's awful. And I understand why Palestinians are angry. They have a right to be angry. And it's and the only viable solution is something that's not really great, particularly not great for them. So I think they deserve sympathy, right? I don't think that's infantilizing. But especially when you see like the Palestinians, that they have a group called Fatah. That's the Palestinian Authority, right? That used to participate in terrorism and changed. They legitimized themselves. They have a leader that used to be a Holocaust denier, and he's changed, right? And tried to improve himself, right? And they're like, so there is a better option there. Like, you could support, like, there is not, the Palestinians do not take, like, when people act like the Palestinians, the only people advocating for them or trying to fix things is Hamas, is just absolutely wild, because there's another group. And like, so it's like, why do you pick the group? Why are you picking Hamas over Fatah when Hamas is the one that's calling for a Jewish genocide? It's kind of weird when you've got another option. It's just strange. The funny thing is that Fatah blames tons of shit that happens to the Palestinians on Hamas, and Hamas is exactly what Israel uses to justify tons of violence that happens in Gaza. So Hamas literally, directly leads to more shit happening to Palestinians. So it's like, if you care about Palestinians, it's like, why would you care about Hamas? Like, why would you advocate for Hamas? It makes no sense. Even if you give zero shits about Israelis. Like, why? It just means to me that you care much more about the anti-Semitism within Hamas, that you like that, right? Because you can't be thinking that they're effective at what they do for Palestinians, because they're not. And on top of that, Hamas oppresses Palestinians terribly. Just look it up, what they've done to Palestinians. The thing is that, like, you can be super, super critical of Israel, and that could be your issue. You could be advocating for Palestinians, but, like, you can do that simultaneously. Like, advocating against anti-Semitism contributes, it furthers your position. And I think when you are a voice regularly speaking against anti-Semitism, the same way I just brought up the serfs, about like how I'm going to give someone like the serfs more leniency because I've seen Lance stand up against anti-Semitism. It's the same thing. If you are here and you want to advocate for Palestinians and you believe in their plight and their issues and all of those things, right? When you speak out against anti-Semitism, you literally give more credence to the Palestinian cause, right? And you give more credence to your own, to when you give criticisms against Israel, because your criticisms are going to be taken so much more seriously. So, like, it just legitimizes, and like, especially if you are careful with your language and how you criticize Israel, it just means that your criticisms are just so much more likely to be taken and accepted. Now, granted, guys, like, as much as I try to be unbiased, as human beings, we're all biased. And I was born in Israel. I was raised as a Zionist. I don't know if I consider myself, it depends on your definition of Zionism, whether I'm a Zionist or not. I don't personally have a connection to Israel. I feel much more connected to Canada, but I'm sure I still have tons of bias within me, as much as I try. So you should always be double checking me and doing your own research and stuff like that when it comes to history. But it's just like, it shouldn't be connected to anti-Semitism, and it sucks that it is. Yeah, you have to understand, okay, for people who are debating race and stuff with Jews, is that the concept of race, right? Now, I'm making a video actually specifically on this, but the concept of a race is a modern one. And it's not something that exists in science. It's not something that exists in reality. And I know you're probably like, wait, I don't know what you're talking about, because I see black people and I see white people and they have different skin color. Sure. But why, when you see someone who has, like, say, like, stereotypically black features, they'll often be grouped, even though their skin's very light, they'll often be put in one category versus, say, like, I don't know, typical white girl with blonde hair who's, like, tanned her skin to be pure dark orange, and her skin's technically darker, right? Like, why are you putting her in another category? Like, these groups are not actually based in any kind of, like, objective fact, right? Like, they're based on these, like, very arbitrary collection of traits that have been put and divided into these racial categories, and they still exist in our society, very much so. And Judaism and Jews go back, and this idea of races really starts in the 18th century. I'm making a video on it, on like the creation of racism. People have an idea that racism goes back thousands and thousands of years. Not true, right? What they're thinking of is xenophobia goes back thousands of years. But xenophobia and racism are very different. There's some similarities. They're both bigoted, but there's different elements of it, right? And racism is a specific brand of bigotry that's particularly heinous. And Judaism goes back way further than the creation of race as a concept. And so because of that, Jews as a whole, now there are some exceptions. Particularly, I find American Jews sometimes see things a little differently. But as a whole, right, Jews do not see the world because they're so much older than the concept of race. We've existed for 2,000 years. More than 2,000 years. The concept of race just we don't see the world that way. We don't divide people that way. And that's not to say that there isn't bigotry within Judaism. There's tons of bigotry, as there are with lots of groups. But we just don't divide people into like black, brown, white, Arab. Like it's like if you very much in the Jewish world, there's Jews and non-Jews. That's the divide. And there are differences within them. Like we'll see people as like Russian Jews or Iraqi Jews or Mizrahi Jews and different but they're based on like ethnic or national groups or different types of Judaism that they follow. It's not like a pure racial category. And so it's just like a different way of looking at it, different divide. Why is racism worse than xenophobia? I would argue that they are equally bad. That's actually a really good question. Maybe I just take that for granted. But I think one of the issues, I think xenophobia is easier to tackle than racism, because xenophobia is much more based on like this idea of fearing like the other nation, and fearing the other person from another nation, whereas racism is like this idea of that someone that deep down within their bones they're inferior. I think there's something, and this totally depends on your own personal morality, but to me, there's something more disturbing about that. Right? I think I totally understand, like, people always fear what they don't know. That's why xenophobia has existed for thousands and thousands of years, right? But I don't think racism, but racism is like, it's based on a specific type of ideology that I think is particularly heinous and more challenging to combat. The effects of two can be the same, just as people can be racial supremacists, others can be, yeah. I mean, the effects can be totally the same, especially like when you see like how the Poles were discriminated against based on their nationality, etc. But I actually think that you really see the difference when you look at the history of anti-Semitism, right? And this is something that we're going to talk about. No, I'm not going to go on forever. It's not going to be boring. Don't worry. But there are actually different types of anti-Semitism. And I'm sure you know this. But in reality, like, Jews have existed for thousands of years, right? I don't know the exact number. I'm not an ancient Jewish historian. I should have brought on an ancient historian. Eris is Eris. But when I think about anti-Semitism, I usually divide it, and I think most scholars, on average, divide it into 4 categories, right? So there's ancient anti-Semitism, which I honestly, I have a hard time even calling it anti-Semitism, but I'm going to call it that for colloquial sake. But instead, and when we describe that, think about the way the Romans treated the Jews, right? That's like the kind of stuff that that we're talking about. So, and when you think of how the Romans treated the Jews, I mean, Jesus is a great example. And I'm sure you know his story. But there's plenty of instances, like the temple's getting destroyed, or like just the way the ancient world treated the Jews is not a great place, right? But then there's medieval anti-Semitism, which is very much connected to, which is mostly Christian anti-Semitism, which is focused on things like blood libel. If you're new to my stream, I've talked about this in the past, but I'll briefly go over it soon. But it's very much focused on this idea of like, it's very connected to religious Christianity. And it's this, and it comes from this idea of the Jews being the ones to betray Jesus. And so you can never trust them. And so they're coming for your children's blood and all this stuff. Then, there's modern anti-Semitism, which is like, when you say modern, a lot of people think, oh, like what's going on right now? No, it's different. Modern anti-Semitism it comes with the advent of modernism as like a philosophical movement, which really starts in the 18th century with the beginning of the Enlightenment. And you're like, wow, so they became enlightened and they started hating Jews. That's great. That sounds amazing. But with the Enlightenment comes the concept of races, and this is where race as a concept and racism as a consequence starts developing and gets created, right? And of course, modern anti-Semitism, which begins in the 18th century, it culminates in the Holocaust. Like the ideology that starts then, like after a few hundred years, obviously the Holocaust is a consequence of it. And the Nazis bought into all that bullshit about skull shapes and the whole shebang. And then there's the last form of anti-Semitism, which is a controversial one. So do your own research on this, right? But it's what scholars call new anti-Semitism. Now, what scholars believe is that this new anti-Semitism is using, like, because it's become so socially unacceptable to be so, like, visually and obviously anti-Jewish, they use anti-Zionism as a shield. So they'll say things like, it's like how it was called the Protocols of Zion, not the Protocol of Jews. Or they'll say that they're against the Zionist banks. And let's talk about the control of the Zionist control of the media. Like that kind of language, right? Now, the problem with new anti-Semitism and why it's so controversial as a concept is it's vague, right? It's vague, and it also is about our current existence. It's not in the past. And so people feel more attacked by it, and it's also often misused. So there is a pretty famous scholar, depending on your politics, called Alan Dershowitz. And pretty infamous for defending the OJ trial, and also friends with Epstein. Not a great guy, okay? Now, he argues, he'll take a term like new anti-Semitism, and whenever someone is critical of Israel, or harsh against Israel, he will say that they are participating in new anti-Semitism. Right? And I think that that's a misuse of the term. Now, granted, some people say that because there are people like him who misuse it, that new anti-Semitism doesn't exist. I don't think that's true. I think it does exist. I think it's pretty obvious that it does, right? I just think it gets misused. So I just think it's important to call out when it does get misused. But just because it doesn't mean the actual thing doesn't exist. If you want to read about this, and if you're interested in learning more about it, and you want to hear about it from scholars, right? And not just like the typical shit you would see on Twitter, people advocating for tribalism and the bullshit, right? There is an amazing scholar called Deborah Lipschat. Okay, this woman right here. Okay. She's a great scholar. She's a scholar in anti-Semitism. She's a historian. She's a legit person, okay? And she is also an anti-Semitism, I was going to say an anti-Semitism advocate, like she's advocating for it. But she's a anti-Semitism advocate. And she's most famous. There's actually a movie made about her. And you could go read her books, right? But there's a movie made about her, about this crazy story that happened with her and the disgusting Nazi, shamed and dismissed false historian David Irving. Right, where he literally took her to court because she called him a Holocaust denier. And she had to prove in court that the Holocaust happened. In a court of law, in England, in Britain. It's crazy. There's a movie about it. You can read books about it. It's like a crazy story. And it's fascinating. They actually discovered more things about gas chambers and stuff because she had all these great scholars working on her case. And she regularly writes about anti-Semitism. She's an amazing scholar, great person to read. She's written a few books on the subject. So Anti-Semitism Here and Now is what I would recommend if you want to hear about her thoughts on anti-Semitism. And she's great about it. Like, this is not like a Alan Dershowitz type character. Like, this is someone, she accepts legitimate criticism of Israel and everything. It's a great person to learn that stuff about. So, anyways. Now, the term anti-Semitism probably sounds really confusing. Because, especially if you're here and you're Arabic, right? I don't know if I'm sure there's something Arabs in my chat, right? Or you're Assyrian, or you're like even Armenian. You're probably like, hey, I'm a Semite too. Like, what the fuck? Like, I'm a Semite. What the heck? Why is anti-Semitism, why does anti-Semitism only care about Jews? That's so unfair. Like, I'm a Semite. What the fuck? Right? We are among you. Now, it's funny, like, Nick Cannon literally said that anti-Semitism doesn't exist because the Jews aren't even real Semites. Which is... Nick Cannon said this, right? And he's still platformed and everyone just acts like he's just chill. The reason why anti-Semitism is a term and makes no sense, right, is because there used to be a term to describe this. Now, anti-Semitism is a new term. It actually gets invented in 1879 in Germany, of all places. Okay? Of all places, right? Great place, right? And it's literally, okay, it's because the term before that was Judenhass. Yeah, doesn't Judenhass sound so, I don't know, it's just got such more of a bite to it. I like it more, okay? And if you don't speak German, okay, Judenhass, it translates simply to Jew hatred. So that used to be the term to describe it. Now, you're probably wondering, why did they rename it to anti-Semitism? It's so much more complicated. I'd rather say Judenhass. It's such a cooler term. Right? And the reason why is because, remember I told you guys about the different types of anti-Semitism and how, like, and how medieval anti-Semitism is different than modern Nazi-like anti-Semitism that starts in the 18th century? Now, this is because, and this is because the term Jew has, okay, this is because in the 18th century, right, and the 19th century, medieval style anti-Semitism wasn't cool anymore, right? Not because hating Jews is not cool. I mean, hating Jews in this world is unfortunately always okay, right? Because people love hating Jews for some reason. However, people are always trying to find new excuses on how to hate Jews, right? Because they've got this weird bigoted instinct that they have, and it's disgusting. And so they're always trying to justify it somehow. Now, when medieval anti-Semitism, or medieval Judenhass, they justified it through religion, because medieval society was very, very religious. We know this, right? So, as a consequence, right now, as a consequence, the type of anti-Semitism and the type of Judenhass that we saw was just not cool anymore. Like, saying that, like, Jews were this secret cult trying to take children because, like, for blood libel, for their religious weird cult things. That's not fashionable anymore because no one's really that religious anymore. No one's going to believe that. We don't really believe in all those things anymore, like they're modern, they're modernists. They believe in science. They believe in science and logic and reason, right? So, but they still need to hate Jews. So how do they still hate Jews? With believing in logic, science, and reason. Oh, instead, right? And this is actually very similar to the ways they justified hating black people. Very, very similar, right? Is that they say that there is something inherent in the race of the Jew. And so this is when, and so because the term Jew hatred sounded so barbaric, when in reality, what they were doing was just science, right? What they were doing was science. It's not that they want to hate Jews, guys. It's the science, it's the bones, it's the bone density. It's not that they want to believe that Jews run the world. It's just they've literally got this inherent thing within their noses that just leads to it, right? And it's just a part of their race. Again, this is not something that is unique to just Jews. I want to reiterate this. This is something we see with Black people, and particularly we see it with Black people, right? With the creation of the concept of Blackness by racists, right? And when they start justifying skull structures and all these things that are all pseudoscience, and I repeat, they are pseudoscience, okay? Which means they have been completely disproven in science. And trust me, people have tried. So because there's this new trend, this trend of being reason over and logic and all these things, they decide that Judenhass just sounds so barbaric, right? How do we make it sound more scientific? We want to make it sound like it's logical, We don't hate Jews because of because of these old myths. We hate Jews because it's science, right? So we want to say that the Jews are Semites, and we're going to be against the Semites. So it was about criticizing their race. And this is where the concept of the race of Jews really develops. And with the concept and of course, there's no such thing as the race of Jews. There are the ethnic group of Jews, which is a different thing than a race. Right? But it's a little more fluid than something like a race, right? You can marry into it. It's just totally different concept. Made just to justify the enslavement of people of Africa. Yep, that's exactly what it is, right? You can look all about it. So you can look up, there's an amazing Wikipedia article, if you want to read more about this, called Scientific Racism, otherwise known as race realism. I don't like using that term because it implies that race is real, which it's not. But yeah, you can look it up. There's a great article on the history of scientific racism, and there's a lot of overlap with, the way other racial groups get discriminated against, right? So Jews are one of the groups. But yeah, that's where the term anti-Semitism comes from. And it's interesting because in a world with such, where we're so concerned about language, and we're so concerned about what this language means. I literally saw on the episode of Survivor, right? This season on Survivor, every season on Survivor, Jeff, the host of the show Survivor, says, "Come on, get guys." And they decided that they weren't going to use the term guys because it might offend people who don't identify as a guy. And I think in a world that's so concerned, just like that, about language, it's crazy to me that we still use the term anti-Semitism because it's so non-descriptive. First of all, Jews are not the only Semites, and the concept of a Semite is stupid anyways, there's a long, weird, fucked up history of that. And it's literally used as a way to make Jew hatred more palatable. Okay? That's what the term comes from, and we still use it. God knows I'm literally using it, and I've got to use it because colloquially, that's just the thing to do. So it's kind of crazy that we just don't use Jew hatred, because it's just so much more descriptive. Like of it. So it's interesting. There's also, so there are those 4 sections. Now there are other kind of things that kind of overlap and go in between those sections. Like there's Islamic anti-Semitism, and there's different types of Islamic anti-Semitism. Now recently, what I would say is that the attack that happened on Saturday was an example of Islamic anti-Semitism. However, and I also want to repeat, there is also Islamophobia within Jewish communities too. However, the Islamic anti-Semitism that you see today is very different than the Islamic anti-Semitism that you would have seen during the medieval period, or even during the 17th century, like later, like after the medieval period. Now, there was anti-Semitism in those Islamic countries. If people tell you there wasn't, they're lying to you for a political purpose. It's not true. But it was very different than it is now. Now, the type of Islamic anti-Semitism that you see now is actually much more similar to the modern anti-Semitism that we saw in Europe 100 years ago. Oh, and the reason you're probably wondering, like, why does Islamic anti-Semitism change so much? Like, why does it become different? Why is there like a new Islamic anti-Semitism different, right? And they're completely different. In fact, I would actually wager that if I put like, say your average like Islamic anti-Semite today in a room with an Islamic anti-Semite from 300 years ago or 400 years ago, they'd have very little in common. I bet you the Islamic anti-Semite from 500 years ago would point at the one from today and be like, hey, you're taking it a bit far, buddy, huh? Right? Like, they have very little in common. Now, the reason why is because modern Islamic anti-Semitism was transferred there by, like, I want to take it's by a particular, should I call them a country? Okay, by a particular group of countries. I don't know, empire, should I call it that? I don't know. Whatever. Okay. Take a wild guess. Okay, yes, it was the USSR. Soviet Union. You're right. God, we've got some good scholars here. I'm surprised that I didn't have people say America, because everyone's so quick to blame America for everything that, like, yeah, because of, also, it's connecting colonialism. You are completely correct, homonym. Now, modern Islamic anti-Semitism is much more dangerous than historical Islamic anti-Semitism. Now, historical Islamic anti-Semitism, sorry, it's like a lot of words from my throat. Like, it's bad. Don't get me wrong, it's bad. But I would say that the modern type is much more dangerous. I wouldn't want both, but if I had to pick one, I prefer the previous one. Yeah. So a lot of people don't know this, but the Soviet Union was incredibly anti-Semitic. Now, the reason why a lot of people don't talk about it is because the Soviets mostly saved Jews in World War II. They saved my grandfather. But there was a ton of anti-Semitism within the Soviet Union. And it wasn't just like anti-theism. Like, I think someone mentioned that. It wasn't just your typical, like, oh, like, we like Jews, we just don't like their religion. Like, it wasn't like that. It was very much connected. You know how, like, in what was going on in the United States, where they're like, oh, like, any Jew is a communist? Well, the Jews get the other shit at the end of the stick, where in the communist countries, they get called capitalists because they control the banks. So, now the Soviet Union actually starts developing a very close relationship, particularly with Egypt, in the 50s. And they naturally, sorry if my voice is collapsing a bit. I'm going to have to do some React content soon, so I give my voice a break. But they end up transferring a ton of anti-Semitism, and they transfer it literally by actually sending them copies of Mein Kampf. I'm going to take a wild guess. In what country in the world is Mein Kampf the bestseller? Like today, where does Mein Kampf sell the most? Yeah, Zazu gets it right with Egypt. It's Egypt. Yeah, and why? Because Egypt had a very close relationship with Russia. Sorry, with the Soviet Union. Why did someone say Thailand? It's really fascinating, right? There's actually, you could look into, there's so much in this of how European anti-Semitism, particularly in the Soviet Union, gets transferred to the Middle East. It's one of the reasons why, like, when I talk about Islamic anti-Semitism, I think it's important to create that dividing line. I also think, like, a lot of people think that Islamic anti-Semitism is as a consequence of Zionism. And it's true that Zionism and the creation of Israel definitely put a light on it, right? And I'm sure that the reason why Egypt was so quick to take on and further all these ideas was because as a consequence of that. But there are also other reasons, and it's not so black and white. The reason why I say this, because, like, we see anti-Semitism take on different forms and transcend between different trends. It finds its way, it always has a way, like, imagine Jew hatred as a Bogart. You guys read Harry Potter? Sorry, I know she's a transphobe, but, like, you know, the Bogarts in Harry Potter, where they find your fear. They're like these monsters that almost have no shape, but they know what your deepest fear is. So, like, I'm mostly scared of spiders. So then I'll become like a big spider, you know? It's kind of like that. Yeah, ridiculous. So Jew hatred's like that. I almost wonder, I don't know, like, the concept of the Bogart is just a smart concept. And, like, Jew hatred has this way. It's so embedded in our culture and in nations' histories and stuff that it just has a way. It has a way of morphing into whatever the trends are acceptable. And it's something that I've noticed because a lot of the anti-Semitism I've gotten, they've called me, did you notice in the language? Now, let's go back to the screen cap of what the guy said to me. I'm just using this as an example. I know I'm giving this guy attention, but I really don't give a shit. So let's, like, analyze this for a second. This beautiful piece of poetry. He calls me a racist, right? So he calls me a racist as a consequence of being Jewish. He uses the fact that I'm pale, which unfortunately I am, right? As a thing against me. As if, like, because I'm pale, because I have such light skin, I discriminate against him because of his darker skin. And he mixes those things in with a bunch of other things, including I'm a pig, all that kind of stuff, right? The pig inbred Jew, like, that's just typical shit. So I don't even give a shit about that. He brings up the fact that, you know, he's angry because I was okay with I wasn't okay with someone calling out racism. And I think that, and a lot of the anti-Semitism I get is mixed with social justice talking points. Because, of course, racism is bad. And if I was a racist, granted, I personally think everyone's racist, and I think it's a bad thing. Everyone's got elements of racism in them, and they need to work on. So I'm sure I have some, like anyone. But if I was a racist, I should be called out for it, right? If I purposely was grossed out by someone that was brown or South Asian, I should be called out for that. And that's a social justice issue. Pigs are cute, and tasty. And so what he does here is he mixes old ideas of anti-Semitism, so inbred Jew, pig shit, like shit, with modern social justice, being an anti-racist, arguing that because I'm white, I inherently because I have white skin. I don't know if I'm white. So, it depends on your idea of what white is. Because of my light skin, that I'm, that I inherently am being critical. I'm inherently discriminatory against his darker skin. Of course, there's a fucking weird irony because he's being incredibly anti-Semitic throughout this message. But it's interesting. And this is why I'm using this as an example, because God knows I've got a billion examples of messages I get. Is how much it's connected. He's used the modern social justice movement, otherwise known as Twitter world. But it's interesting how he brings this up as a way to justify his anti-Semitism. So I think that makes it, I hope this makes you guys think, because it made me think about how, now he's particularly bad at hiding his anti-Semitism, because he's obviously, by these comments, he doesn't seem very intelligent. But some people are. And there are probably better ways he could have hid his anti-Semitism and with some of the social justice stuff and make it more palatable, like the original guy who invented the term anti-Semitism. So, and that's what I find interesting, especially about the anti-Semitism that I see on Twitter, is how often they call Jews colonizers and settlers. Recently, there was a Jewish person in Israel, just your average innocent person, walking around. They weren't even someone who lives in Israel. They were just a tourist, but they're Jewish, and they were just walking around the market, touring Israel, and they were stabbed to death. This happened like a month ago, 2 months ago. And so they were stabbed to death, and the consequence of it is, and people on Twitter went crazy, justifying their actions. Because they said that what that person was doing was that they were this was an indigenous Palestinian, right? Rioting against his colonizer. Or I think it was a woman who did it, her colonizer. And settler. And it's interesting how they started using language that is very trendy right now. And based on very legit concepts of like settlers and colonizers and racism and all these things that are like legit ideas. And things that people should be concerned about. And I do think that there are illegal settlements in Israel. But it's interesting that they just called some random Jewish person who was, who's literally just there as a tourist, right? Just to probably see their, where their ancestors came from or something. I don't know why they're there. And they see them and they call them a settler. And that justifies their killing. In reality, that person was stabbed for one reason. That person was stabbed because they were Jewish. That's all it comes down. It is that simple. They were stabbed because they were Jewish. It is no different. It is no different than any form of historical violent anti-Semitism. But people have found ways, but they, just like they did originally with the original wording of anti-Semitism, to try to make it more palatable, they have changed the language to language that is currently trendy, like settler, colonizer, right, to justify their actions. And it's just something that I notice that just kind of disgusts me. And that's why, I really hope. And I know initially a lot of people are like, if you don't know about these tropes and you don't know about the history of how anti-Semitism has this way of morphing into different trends, you can look at that and just say like, oh, like they're just using bad language. Like, I don't think they're literally being anti-Semitic. They just like, it's just a misuse of the term. But if you know about the history and you educate yourself, and this is one of the things I'm hoping to do with this stream, and you see these trends, you start like, it's the same thing that if you look at like the trends, like I should probably do a stream on Islamophobia, but I'd probably prefer to do that with someone that is Muslim, that like knows much more about the history. I might do it with I'll see, like I'll think about that, how to do that responsibly. But when you look at like forms of hatred, and especially a form of hatred like anti-Semitism that is so old, and you see its trends, it's very easy to start seeing the pattern of where of even things that like if they get away with saying in modern day. This is the same stuff that is used to justify whorephobia and misogyny against me, hiding abuse with the shield of social justice rhetoric. Yes. And it's one of the reasons why I don't think it's a coincidence that there's a lot of trans people in my community. There's a lot of trans. If you are trans, I would love, like, you know, type X if you're willing, right? I know there's a lot of trans people in my community, and I don't think it's a coincidence. Because I actually think that the trans experience is something very similar to the Jewish experience, right? Particularly in how, like, you can see, like, how, like, a lot of social justice terms, and terms that are trendy, right? Like protecting women's bodies, protecting women's safety, right? Concerns about rape rates, all these things. These are terms, these are like trendy things that are based in real legitimate concepts, right? Because we should protect women's bodies. We should be concerned about rape rates and all these things. But it's used as a way to justify its own hatred and transphobia against trans people. So I don't think that's like a coincidence, right? And so like, I think that what I'm guessing is the reason why I have like a lot of trans people in my community is they probably like connect to it because they see a similar experience that happens within like their own experience and all that. Obviously there are major differences between trans people and Jewish people, but the similarities are kind of crazy, especially in like that specific way, you know? So what I'm hoping is like, in telling you guys about the history of the way that term is used, that you'll start noticing and calling it out more. Because I cannot, when you are a member of the group that's being attacked, it's so shitty to have to defend yourself. Because you are always going to be gaslit. Oh, they're not being transphobic, right? They're just, you know, talking about protecting women. Oh, they're not being anti-Semitic. They're just criticizing Israel. What are you talking about? Everyone heard about the thing. It was all over the news. Like things like that. Like, you know how many people have been trying to gaslight about that shit? It's absolutely crazy. And the statistics, I know that they're incorrect because the statistics completely prove that. But it means so much when I see someone speak out about it. Like, so much. When I see someone that's not Jewish that speaks out about, I mean, obviously I love it when Jews speak about it, right? When they're braver than I am. It's amazing. But when someone that's not Jewish speaks out about it, this is one of the reasons why when I see someone being Islamophobic in person, I always speak out about it if I can. If I like, or if I see someone being transphobic, like saying something when you're not a member of that group, there is nothing more meaningful than that. It's like, it's seriously, it's the most heartwarming thing. And when I made that Twitter post about just how sad and alone I felt, which is not normal me, because I normally try to not to be super emotional. But when I made that post, it was like, I got some messages from some people that it was like it was just so amazing to see them asking, like, what can I do? What can I say? Or, like, if people quote tweeted and said that they, like, what happened was disgusting, or just lending some form of support. Like, you guys told me that Lance from the Surf spoke about it. I genuinely, if that's true, then I think he's probably one of the only people who spoke about it that day in Twitch Politics, which I think was incredibly cool. And I honestly, just saying something, and educating yourself, so when you say something, you don't sound like an idiot, it's probably helpful. But that, like, it just means so much. And I speak particularly to the people here who are very, very anti-Israel. And I'm sure you're watching my chat. Even if you disagree with me and you don't think I'm anti-Israel enough, or I'm not critical of Israel enough, obviously I'll disagree about that. But when you speak out against anti-Semitism, especially anti-Semitism that's trying to hide under a criticism of Israel, and you know how to partake in it, it means that when you give a criticism of Israel, I listen harder. That's just how, like, humans work. We listen harder. We listen more. I know it's not grammatically correct. So, like, if not for the sake of just being against anti-Semitism, like, just do it so people listen more to you. And people will take you much more seriously. And right now, the people, like Israel is a democracy, and the people who can make the biggest changes to how Palestinians are Israelis. That's just the truth. And the more you speak out against, and the more you try to cut out the anti-Semitism hiding within your movement, the more your movement opens up for people who can enact real change. I find it a salient reflection that people in the Israel-Palestine conflict are adopting ideas from American racial discourse. Yeah, and it's really incorrect. When people look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and they see it through, like, an American racial perspective, it's so false. Like, they'll get something's right, something's wrong. It's just not the right way you want to see the conflict. It's completely dishonest. It's the same thing with the Republican Party. If they were so racist, a lot of conservative POC would vote for them. Yeah. Oh, that's actually a really good point. You actually see it a lot when I see people take the issues that Indigenous Canadians and Indigenous Americans experience, and they transfer that kind of paradigm over to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And they do this because it makes it seem much more simple and much more obvious who's the moral, like, where the moral right is, you know? And it makes no sense because in reality, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a conflict between two groups that are both indigenous to the region. I know some Israelis will disagree with me on this, but Palestinians are also indigenous to the region. In fact, I think like a quarter or a third of Palestinians are descended from the original Israelites as well. So like, there's so much mix there. It's hard to say like who was there first, 100%. But just in general, both of these groups are indigenous and they're fighting over the land, right? And one is currently much more powerful than the other. And it's a complicated conflict. And you should read about it, you should learn about it, and all of those things. But it's a unique conflict, and it's not something that you want to look at like, like use like a kind of like look at one country, just think it's the same thing and apply to another, because it's a different situation. Broad, Jews still get attacked every day in NYC. On Long Island, we have Jewish schools whose websites get taken over by Nazis. It's so fucked. I see lefties just not say a word about it. I see Democrats always speaking about it, but lefty activists very rarely. Love you, buddy. We are here for you. Thank you for saying that, Casey. It's crazy how common it is. And like people are just they're shocked by it. But like the numbers don't lie. Like the most common form of hate crime in America today against every group. Like if you were just to ask lefties, what group do you think is the most common hate crime against? I don't think anyone would say Jews. But it's true. It's Jews. Absolutely crazy. Anti-Semitism is just really, really common. Anyways, I'm going to be interviewing some people. Now, if you are a Jewish person and you want to tell your story of anti-Semitism, hopefully, like, it needs to be, like, kind of not super, super long. But if you're interested in telling your story, you can now come onto my chat. Like, you could come into Callouts Club. Just hop into the waiting room if one of my mods can put the chat there. And you can tell your story, and I'll talk to you about it, about your experience. Hey there.
Yeah, I'm here. What's up? How's it going, Eris?
Hey. Okay. So you could go on camera if you want.
Yeah, let me get the camera running. Let's see. It's a little off, but there you go.
Oh, there. You got your bisexual lighting going on?
Yep.
Okay.
Of course, always.
So, Sam, you are a Jewish and a streamer, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so what would you say is the worst? I'm sure you've gotten anti-Semitism in person and anti-Semitism online. What would you say was worse, like the online anti-Semitism or the real life one?
So, in my experience, the in real life anti-Semitism that I've experienced is kind of probably worse. Specifically in my case, because it has to do kind of with some of the interpersonal conflicts that I've had in throughout my middle school and high school life, and kind of has to do with a lot of the connections within the community that I grew up in. But there have been some messages or some things that have happened online that have been probably just as bad, if not worse, in terms of like the actual context of or the content of what they're saying to me. I think that if you're removing the context of like the connections of with the people I had who were doing the anti-Semitism, I would probably say that the content of the anti-Semitism I received is probably worse online, but in person it felt much worse. Like
it feels worse because there's also like a danger element too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you get some stuff that's like just happens randomly on the street. Like I live in a relatively large city, or one of the bigger cities, and very diverse city. And like on my first week moving into my new apartment, I went to a convenience store and to pick up some things, and the person in front of me had a SS tattoo on his neck. And that's not something that's like a personal slight of anti-Semitism to me, but like that imagery has a deep, profounding effect.
The fact that it's the SS, right?
Yeah.
For those who don't know, like the SS is much like, that's a more harmful image to a Jewish person than something like even a swastika. Because a swastika is a symbol for the Nazi party, and it's now a symbol of racism. Now, the SS is much more specific because the SS were the paramilitary organization that Himmler in Nazi Germany created in order to literally enact the Holocaust. So they were the people literally perpetrating the mass killing of Jews themselves. When the killing was just so harsh that even normal German soldiers couldn't do it, but the SS could. So it's a particularly harmful image for a Jewish person to see.
Yeah, and again, I didn't really think much of it, mainly because the guy was covered in tattoos, and there was a lot of more like prison gang tattoos. So in my mind, yeah, this was something I clenched my fist and I was ready to, like, again, I'm not a big person, and this guy was much bigger than me. But like,
were you wearing your Jewish star at the time?
I was wearing my Star of David.
Did you hide it? Did you like put it under your shirt?
No, I mean, I didn't. I wasn't really afraid. I mean, I don't know. I'm relatively.
Am I just a huge pussy? Like,
I'm in a relatively
I would put that
nice
shit under my shirt.
I don't know. I wasn't really afraid. I had, I was very much clenching my fist. I was very much like trying not to give attention to myself, so I wouldn't look. I didn't say anything or anything to the guy. But yeah, I mean, that was like, sometimes in just passing, things like that happen. Or I remember when there was a rise in hate crime in the States, and it was during Rosh Hashanah, and I went to temple, and we needed to get a police escort as part of our passage because we were going from one temple to another. And the state was worried that there would be anti-Semitic attacks against our group of Jewish people, so we had to have police escorts. And so there's like a level, and I also grew up in Newtown, Sandy Hook, which is where the Sandy Hook school shooting happened. So like I'm kind of used to this kind of like police presence, but like it seems a sense of like insecurity, like you don't know what's going to happen. It gives you some level of fear, and so there's like an interesting aspect with that. But like on a personal note, again, like the personal anti-Semitism, I think, getting called slurs directly is probably pretty bad, especially when it comes from, people, people that you've had an attachment to. I always have this one story that I tell people. I had a sort of similar background. When I was in high school, I used to actually argue with some of these people that would consider themselves white nationalists or Nazis that were in my high school. There's a group of about 4 or 5 of them, and they were Holocaust deniers and stuff like that, and I would vehemently have conversations with them. And I used to just let it go, but there was one point at which I was just like, I can't. Like I'm tired of listening to this conversation. So I educated myself on a lot of the points of how to debate, Holocaust denial. And so I started getting into these conversations, and luckily I don't think these are in-person conversations. So there's always the threat of like it becoming violent. Luckily there wasn't ever any physical violence. And I did become kind of friendly with some of these people. And the worst case, the most, the case of anti-Semitism that has affected me the most profoundly is I was invited to a party when I was in high school, and I thought that the people who were inviting me to this party were my friends. And when I got there, the group of the neo-Nazis were actually invited, and none of my other friends were there. And at the time, they just dug into me with berating comments about me being, saying things like I'm a dirty Jew, calling me slurs over and over again, asking me, telling me that I should go kill myself, that I'm not worthy of the air that I breathe. There's some pretty gross stuff. I left and I walked home. I probably ran maybe a mile away from this person's house that I was at a party with, and I called my parents, and they were wondering why they were picking me up a mile away from where they dropped me off an hour ago. And I never told them. I don't think I've ever told my dad what happened. My dad is very active when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I've never told my dad either about the things that have happened to me. It's like, you don't want to depress them, make it worse.
There is a case where I did tell my dad one time of a case of anti-Semitism that was happening in school. I had been dealing with some normal stress, but at the time, people were throwing coins at me and mocking me, saying that I should go pick up coins. And again, it's always like
people always do that, and they think they're being funny. It's like they always think they're the first person that's ever thought of that joke.
And like I was just one day I came home and I was just like so exhausted, and my mom's like, what's wrong? And I said, I'm just tired of this fucking shit happening to me. And I let it slip, and I had not told my parents. This had happened for about a month, and I hadn't told my parents because I didn't want them. And my dad left. My mom called my dad. My dad left work early. He works about 2 hours away from where our home is. So he left work early, picked me up, drove to my high school, walked into the principal's office. The secretary tried to stop him. My dad just walked in. The guy was on a phone call. It was like in a movie, I swear. It's like the craziest thing. My dad just screaming at the principal about how it's unacceptable. And again, these things have happened at my school. I grew up in a relatively majority Christian town, and even the Jewish community there didn't really, because my mom is not Jewish, they didn't consider me Jewish. But I grew up with Jewish, like the Jewish faith in the house. We practiced the high holidays. We went to temple. We went to temples and other places that would accept us. But so I didn't really have like a Jewish community to kind of have that backbone. But something that I also remember is that when my sister, who's older than me, was in high school, somebody burned a swastika into the track and field,
Eek.
And with like chemicals, like in the grass, and the school didn't remove it or do anything to fix it until the synagogue in town threatened to sue. So like I've always kind of lived my life knowing that anti-Semitism is something that I'm going to have to deal with, and that people are going to be more lenient towards than not. I just did a stream talking about free speech, and I looked at the National Soviet Party of America at the village of Skokie, which is a very famous case about free speech, where American Nazis wanted to march on to the village of Skokie, Illinois, which is a place which had about thousands of Holocaust survivors, and these Nazis wanted to march in full Nazi regalia. With
and of course,
swastikas.
they picked the place that had tons of Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, and the reason
Pure
why they chose this. Yeah, this was the second place that there's a whole story behind it. It's very interesting conversation about free speech and like hate speech laws in the United States, and like what we could do about it. So it is kind of and as an American, I've always seen it as a necessary evil, and my dad has always taught me that it's a necessary evil as part of being an American and being able to say what we want, that we have to deal with Nazis and we have to deal with anti-Semitism. But I've always noticed that like other groups, like what you said, is that like there are a lot of other groups that when hatred comes their way, it seems like there are people who come up in arms about it. And to a point, I do see that sometimes anti-Semitism, if it's very, very, very blatant,
if it's really blatant. Right,
I don't think anybody would pass off the fact that I got called the K-slur in high school and be like, that's an okay thing. Like, I don't think anybody like is going to defend that. But there are like layers of anti-Semitism from like the very, very like not direct, like again, the SS tattoo thing. Like somebody might tell me like, oh, why'd you even get it? Like he didn't say anything to you. Why does that bother you? Or something very famously that happened to me, if you know anything about politically provoked, was the I guess necklace gate is what they call it.
So politically provoked is like a I guess like a debate stream that they've been banned in a few places, but they regularly have debates with Nazis. They're like a free speech kind of thing, right? And you've been on there before.
Yeah, so I was on there to discuss AI issues and AI topics and automation.
That's your area of expertise, right?
That's my area. That's what I study. Yeah, that's my area of expertise. I'm in my final semester of my master's program. I'm going to be probably like seeking a job in a related field, doing AI research. I've pre-published a couple papers in AI and stuff like that, so I have some level of expertise that can be talked about there. And the panel was actually hosted by a Groiper who throughout the whole night was doing variations of the Jewish question about, saying things like, well, this group of elites or things like that. And like in context might not be so bad. Again, it's kind of hard you need to know and like look and analyze the entire conversation to really realize that there's like a layer of anti-Semitism there. And when I called it out, I was gaslit, or there was an attempt to gaslight me by groups of people to say that this was just me overreacting, that he's just making fun of me. And I think the tipping point for me was when he noticed that I was wearing a Star of David, and he goes, "Oh, well, that's a very interesting necklace you have on there. What symbol is it?" And it was like very much out of nowhere. Again, the whole night we were talking about. The panelists kept trying to keep the topic on automation and AI, but this host was very insistent on like always talking about the powers that be in his case scenario that were influencing automation and AI. Mm-hmm. And again, when he brought up my necklace, it felt very much like an attack on my religion and my ethnicity for no reason. Like it seemed like it was like out of nowhere. And I even called him out on it on the panel. I said, is there a reason that like that matters, that I'm Jewish? Like I've been very respectful to you. I haven't said anything disrespectful to you. And it was very much like an idea of like, when I was told, or when like I keep hearing like, oh, there's no anti-Semitism there, you're just seeing things, that really makes me feel like it's kind of like crazy.
That's what hurts the most. I don't know about you, but I almost wish that they were more like, I would always take the person with the SS symbol over the person using terms like the elites and the elves, I guess, which is one of their new things, or like
or the Swedes or whatever. Like,
right, or the powers that be, or like the Zionist media, like when they use these terms as a way to hide it, because when people try to deny that something exists when you know it exists, this is one of the reasons why Holocaust denialism hurts so much. It's like that just really, I don't know, it hurts so much, and I don't get why.
Yeah, I think for me personally, the issues that like the difference here is that like because of the difference in reaction from outsiders, and I say outsiders is a different thing, because people who aren't learned in like crypto, whatever, anti-Semitism or whatever, they don't realize it, or if they don't experience it.
Yeah, it's used specifically to bring on like maybe Jimmy Dore types that are like, oh yeah, like there's a bunch of very powerful people who control things, but they're not actually thinking about Jews. They're just thinking about powerful white men or something. And so it's a way to kind of bridge in those people and bring them in.
Yeah, so it allows for people who don't have like bad intentions to be co-opted by these movements, one, which is like a powerful tool that like the crypto movement has, these crypto like anti-Semitic movements have. And then on top of that, it kind of brings parallels. Sorry, I know that we're mostly talking about anti-Semitism, but it brings parallels to kind of racism or these other forms of oppression or prejudice, where like we're told that like we don't know what we're talking about when we're the ones experiencing the prejudice, right? Like it's a very weird feeling to be told that like we don't know what prejudice looks like against us. And like I kind of understand where they're coming from, where it can look very ridiculous to people who like aren't in the know or don't feel that impact. But when you have that constant daily struggle of like, it may not even be daily.
You just know. I feel like you have like this instinct. It's like a Black person once told me this, that sometimes there's just a way that someone looks at you, and they just, you know, that like, and the way they spoke to you, they just know that you're being racist. Like there's like an instinct that comes there, right? And of course, we always need to prove things with facts and logic and the whole shebang. But I do think there is something to be said about sometimes just at least first listen, like, and hear their experiences, because sometimes there are logical reasons where it comes from.
And there's sometimes I just want a space where I can say like, man, that person was being anti-Semitic without having to like prove or like you know, have that conversation about like, what is anti-Semitism? Is this actually anti-Semitism? Can I prove that it's anti-Semitism? And asking for like proof. I just want to vent. Sometimes it's like, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I see anti-Semitism where it isn't. But
because that also can happen with trauma, right? Because sometimes with trauma, you see trauma everywhere and it's not actually there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's tons of times where like I don't know 100% if I'm seeing anti-Semitism, but there's also a point where like, you know, if my you know, if I've run out of spoons, I'm going to use the spoon analogy here. If I've run out of spoons to deal with this stuff for the day, and like something happens to be on the borderline, I might just want to vent about it. And like sometimes in these spaces, specifically in like these online debate spaces, it can be very, very incentivizing for people to ask for proof or to dig into you and ask you to prove that like this is anti-Semitism. And sometimes that's just not what you want to do.
Sometimes it's the time and place. Sometimes not the place to do it. Yeah. Totally get that. Well, Sam, honestly, thanks for coming on here and telling your story.
No problem.
I think it's really cool.
I appreciate you having me.
And just to briefly tell people, you do like AI and all that stuff. You know, you're more complex than someone that's just received anti-Semitism.
Yes.
And you also stream, so feel free to put your stream in chat, and you guys should give him a follow and watch when he streams, because he's super smart guy.
Thank you so much for having me again, Eris, and I appreciate you letting me share my story. So,
of course.
Hopefully you have a great rest of your stream.
Thanks. See
ya.
Okay. Sam are super cool. Hopefully he puts his stream in chat, and you guys should follow it. Okay. Yeah, he was super cool. Sam is great. Gatsby Cat, thank you so much for subscribing. And Lance Saber, thanks so much for subscribing. And also, Wade, thank you so much for hosting. I appreciate it. I appreciate that. It means a lot. Okay. Yeah, so Sam has a Twitter, and especially if you're interested in AI stuff, like, it's a great person to go to. Okay, so I'm going to drag someone else in. Hello?
Hey there.
Hey. So I'm guessing you're on here because you want to tell your experience?
Yeah. It's not, I guess it's not nearly as how traumatizing Sam's experiences were.
It doesn't need to be super serious. Even the minor stuff can
No,
add up,
I understand. Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, fortunately, I guess, in some ways, I grew up kind of in like more insular communities because I grew up like modern Orthodox, and so I went to
Mhm.
the Jewish day school my whole life. And so I didn't always really venture very far out of those communities.
Mhm.
But the extent that I usually did was online. And so, I kind of noticed the trend that like, all right, every time there's like a flare up between like, when the conflict and, in Israel, that's usually when, people come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, it's
And
always
I
how it
think,
works, unfortunately.
yeah, exactly. And I thought that this past year was just really, really disappointing because like some of the anti-Semitism that I experienced, very disappointingly came from people that I liked, like, pseudo like online friends.
Yeah.
To the point where I remember I saw kind of like one of the discords that I'm, kind of somewhat active in for a streamer that I like, which is totally unrelated to Israel whatsoever. Um, I saw there was like a lot of discussion going on, and there was a lot of basically just circle jerking, like anti-Israel circle jerking, and like I popped in and like I kind of was pushing back a little bit, and one of the guys in there was like, who was like very, very vocal and very outspoken. He was like, "Oh, are you Jewish?"
Oh
And I was
God.
like, "Yeah, what of it?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't really want to talk about it anymore because I don't want to offend you."
What?
And that was just like that just made me want to video game myself more than anything else. Um, and it like frustrated me because like it, I guess you're not allowed to have a differing opinion unless you're biased, right? Because that's the underlying assumption, right?
Mhm.
And it bugged me. It bugged me so much that actually, and this sounds so cringe to say, like I made a meme about it, and I can share it with you if you want, because it's something I've experienced a lot. Um, and it's just like about like these echo chambers, how vocal and how confident everybody is in their opinion until somebody who actually might know what they're talking about comes in and provides a differing opinion. um and it was just very frustrating. um so I
It's honestly so frustrating when that happens, especially the echo chambers that develop around this stuff. And the fact that he didn't want to say it around you, is just, honestly, it's just, I'm shocked that he was that honest with you.
Mhm.
In a way, like, it's better. Because I bet you tons of people think that way and they just don't want to say it literally.
Mhm.
But do you ever feel like, as a Jewish person, your opinions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are just immediately dismissed?
Dismissed, yes,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, no, 100%. That is a super, super common feeling,
It's really
unfortunately.
weird because, especially with leftism, like, and it's so connected to like critical theory, which is like this idea that that lived experiences are just as valid as any facts and logic, right?
Mhm.
A lot of people disagree with that, right? I'm not talking about whether or not it's correct, but a lot of those people believe in those concepts, yet like that doesn't apply when it comes to Jews.
Mhm.
And I always found that a little strange.
Yeah, and it's honestly, it's also like it's super annoying because like comparatively to who I grew up with, like the people and like the community that I grew up in, like I'm like pretty left on like Israel Palestinian issues.
Hmm.
But like anything that isn't exactly what like the online, discourse, unless you're like really just immediately ready to call like Israel as bad as
Yeah.
like, Nazi Germany, then you're like not helping the problem, and you're like a Zionist pig and all that other stuff. That
Yeah, I often
you
feel
have to
like I
fall
have to
exactly in
prove.
line.
I often feel like, as a Jewish person, I have to prove how critical of Israel I am before anything I
Yes.
say is taken seriously.
Everything has to have a caveat in front of it. Everything has to be not a caveat. Everything has to be qualified beforehand.
Yeah.
I'm like, you always have to say like, oh, I'm not like a big Israel supporter, but right. It always has to start with that sentence, right?
It's very frustrating. It's one of those like subtle forms of anti-Semitism that just gets passed around as totally legitimate.
Yeah. And I guess I also just because I don't know how much if you had any other questions, but I wanted to say I appreciate what you do to for the discourse on Israel and really everything else. And I really thought I think that you and to an extent Destiny, when he does talk about it, are really some of the only I would say really fair and honest commentators on the conflict in general. So I appreciate what you do.
Cool. That means a lot to me. Seriously. And thanks for telling your story. Like, I appreciate it. And
yeah, thanks for platforming it.
Oh. Okay. Israel. Yeah, no, it's interesting what he brings up, like, especially Israel Nazi comparisons. That stuff is never okay. I just want to repeat that. Comparing Israel to to Nazi Germany is not okay. Okay? Like, I don't care how awful you think Israel is or how many legitimate criticisms you have of Israel and its treatment of Palestinians. Okay? Do not take a group, right, that historically was almost completely wiped off the earth, okay, and a quarter of its entire world population was wiped off the earth within a few years, right, by a group of people and compare them to that group of people. Don't do it. I'm telling you here now, don't do it, right? There are more creative ways to advocate for Palestinians, okay? Just don't do it. Are Eldians considered? What's an Eldian? Yeah, I cringe so hard every time someone writes on Reddit, you'd think Israel would learn from the Holocaust. It's just, don't do it, bro. Don't do it. Okay? Anyways, I will bring one other person to come chat about it. So, this kind of content, it's not spicy hot drama. It might feel kind of shitty sometimes. But like, I have to research for it. I have to prepare for it. And, you supporting it, like just being here, supporting it means the world, but also supporting it financially, because unfortunately it's how the world works. It's so insanely helpful, and it communicates to me that you appreciate this type of quality content over just your typical drama shit and react shit that is so much easier for me to do and easier on my voice to do and all those things. This stuff takes a lot more work. It takes a lot more effort on my part. So it's like, yeah. So at the end of the day, speak with your dollars, because that communicates to me that I can keep doing this content and support myself doing this type of content, because this is what I prefer to do. I feel like it's more impactful. And so, yeah. So I appreciate that. Let's bring in someone else to talk.
Hello.
Hey, Venya.
I have a different perspective. I'm a from Lubavitcher. The majority of the Jewish community on like, especially on social media and whatnot, isn't very, very religious.
Yeah, I agree. I'm usually the person that's the most religious in the room, and I was only Orthodox for like 6 months. So yeah.
Did you when you were a child?
Yeah, I was just I ran away briefly to be religious for a little.
Interesting.
So.
Yeah, I'm Baal Tshuva, but
cool.
like the experience, like from my personal experience as a Jew with anti-Semitism. Before I was Baal Tshuva, I was still like I talked a lot about politics online, most of all. And what I experienced was you get a lot of anti-Semitism, but the big thing about it is it's how you choose to come at it. If you are like constantly posting.
Sorry, people are confused on what Balchuva means. For those who don't know, Balchuva, to my knowledge, it means like when someone has gone from being non-orthodox or non-religious to being religious, right?
It literally means master of repentance. So somebody who's at one point, it can be somebody who was born religious and like went off the derech, stopped being religious, and came back. It's still Balchuva. It's somebody who comes back to religious life. And so with the experience with online, it's if you choose to like make content that gets people riled up, especially from my experience, like I talk a lot about Israel and Palestine. When I was talking about Israel and Palestine, I was like pretty far left, but I was like, no, we shouldn't destroy the state of Israel. No, we shouldn't like ethnically cleanse every single Jew um, out of that land. And that actually brought more anti-Semitism. But I see, like, I follow some Kahanas, like really right-wing, extremely anti-Arab people. They face absolutely no anti-Semitism.
Isn't
What's
that
the reason for this?
fascinating? Now, Kahanas, for those who don't know, yeah, like they're super right wing. They're a small portion of like Zionist advocates, but they advocate particularly for removing all people who are not Jewish, particularly Arabs, from all of Israel and taking over Greater Israel, right?
Right, and they most of all they advocate for like a religious state where if you like drive on Shabbos, you can like be like sentenced to jail time for that. And so like, but I look at their interactions, their comment sections. Nothing they interact with is nothing. None of the like the comments, none of the
Yeah,
responses
they
they
don't
get from
get the
people.
hate. That's such an
They get no
important
hate.
observation. You're so right.
And it's really because they're not trying to like bring a like an understanding of, oh, let's change, let's be better. It's they're surrounding themselves only with Jews and really most people that agree with them. I think this is the biggest issue with online discussion about anti-Semitism. We have this idea that we can solve an issue, but it really isn't going to get solved. If somebody is extremely anti-Semitic, especially Nazis, I've never seen a single time where debunking somebody on the Holocaust has resulted in them not believing in the Holocaust, believing in the Holocaust that happened. I haven't talked to an anti-Zionist who, after like critically examining their worldview and what they think the best future or best way to achieve peace is, I've never seen them like take a critical view and like understand, try to like reconcile their beliefs, especially online. In person, it gets a little bit better because there, like someone else said, you have like a real risk of repercussion. Like if you get like totally like caught on your tracks, or you have like family friends who start like intervening, then you might actually change your mind. And, like at one point I was the crazy anti-Zionist because like the fact that I wasn't at all like interested in anything to do with religion. I knew I was Jewish. I tokenized that when I was talking about Israel. But the only way that I came out of that was not through like logic, really. It was teensy tiny steps. At one point I was like, oh, maybe Zionism would be okay if it happened in like the middle of Russia, like the Jewish
Yeah.
oblast in southeastern Russia. Oh, that'd be okay. And then eventually, like, it's very slow. You're never going to be able to make people see the light like this. It's most often going to be something that internally clicks and not facts or logic based. Because
Humans are emotional. We all are.
they're emotional, exactly. And the very sad thing, Hashem created the world in a way that if you want to, you can be very steadfast in whatever beliefs you have. There's always another way to consider yourself right, advocating for the destruction of Israel, advocating for ethnic cleansing. Oh, but they're oppressors, yada yada yada. There's always a way to, despite how like absolutely atrocious the beliefs you might have, you can change your moral code to fit what you're saying. And that's the issue. For somebody who's steadfast in their beliefs, I don't think online discourse is going to change that. What I think we should do is have that discussion, not for the sake of changing people's minds, for the sake of us understanding our beliefs, being able to defend our beliefs, not for the sake of converting someone and making them realize something, but for the sake of the people who do engage in good faith. As someone said, yeah, good faith. It's a very big thing. If somebody is not engaging in good faith, you're never going to get that. The thing is, we don't know we're good faith. We think we're good faith, but certain things I'm not going to change my mind on. I'm not going to change my mind on if God exists. I know it. I see it. There's no like factual thing that's going to disprove that. In the same way, as somebody who has seen tons and tons of videos, maybe out of context ones, of people getting of Palestinians being beat in the street, of like evictions, regardless of like what the factual underlining of that is, they're not going to change their mind on if that's right or wrong, on if the greater situation. They might change their mind on like some minor things, but you see, and you stick to that belief.
It's
And changing
interesting.
that is very difficult.
It's interesting that you brought up like changing people's minds and you can't like debate them out of it, especially with something like the Holocaust. 3 years ago, I would have completely disagreed with you, but I had this experience because I used to debate Nazis all the time, and sometimes I had okay experiences and sometimes I had shitty ones. But I almost always won the debates. I always made sure that I was like, responsible and came there with facts and logic and everything. And I had this idea that they were just being sold false ideas because they didn't think the Holocaust happened because they just didn't think it happened. And it was as simple as that. And if I just brought the evidence and I taught them it correctly, and I just defeated their advocates, then everything would be fine. And I just got proven over and over, even though I was incredibly good in these debates, probably the only time I've been really great at debates, it's just like, it didn't matter. Because the actual person, at the end of it, there was like this guy named Cultured Thug, who's like this, he's a YouTuber, I think he's still a YouTuber. He's a Holocaust denier. And I won him in a debate, and he stopped it because it was not going well. And so he said like, oh, like, let's do it next time. Let's do it another time. And when we try to reconvene, eventually he says, you know what? I just don't give a shit whether or not 6 million Jews died. Right. And I realized in that moment, I was like, holy shit, he's always known it does exist. Right. Like, he's known it exists. Right. He's just like, it's just at the end of the day, he's just a Jew hater. That's all he was. And it's kind of black-pilled me. I don't know if that's the right term to use. So that's why I stopped debating Nazis, because it's just, I was putting so much effort in for nothing.
Right. I would say the same thing. Like a big discussion in the Israel-Palestine discussion is who's indigenous. The prima facie, like when somebody is just like totally blankly looking at it from like Instagram infographics, it seems entirely apparent that Palestinians are the indigenous ones. They have darker skin. Jews, they're white. Europeans, how can they be indigenous? And changing someone's mind, in my experience, has never happened. There's this one Palestinian girl that I during the summer, I debated her. First, the debate was like over law. Second part was over indigeneity. She had this like the idea that like the left, lefties will use to like what is indigenous is somebody with a like political oppression, and this made me realize that it's not a disagreement over facts. It's a disagreement over like definitions that are like so deeply rooted in the ground for something like
because if that were the case, if it were really about skin color or something, there's tons of Jews that have darker skin color, like Mizrahi Jews, but they don't ever get they're never considered into the equation because it doesn't fit the narrative.
Right. Even with this Mizrahim, they like they're the majority population, and then the next level of deep depth is like, oh, Israel is oppressive. It oppressed its non-white population. The next level of depth is they won't consider people Jewish for like conversions, for making Aliyah, all this stuff. And in this agreement, it's not over like they'll you'd be looking. It's mainly a confirmation bias in these discussions, which I bring back to the original point. Why is what causes anti-Semitism? It's trying to make someone change their mind. When you have two clashing of ideas, either one could be supported with facts. Like, you're not going to experience like anti-Semitism from a if you're like a right winger, if you're debating a centrist, you're not gonna like Hannah's debating a centrist Zionist or centrist, not necessarily Zionist, but like someone who's like, oh, we got someone. They're not gonna face anti-Semitism because they're not trying to change their mind on something contentious, or generally contentious. They're trying to like debate if like Jews should be focusing entirely on strength rather than and like building a nation rather than like factual disagreements over, are these things settlements? Are they illegal? Are they legal? And the real issue is that we're trying to change people's minds. Often we can't change people's minds, but it works better in a private context. And if you have like a stream that's just going over history, like I remember seeing a few months back, he had like a stream going over the history of the 48 War. I don't think you faced any anti-Semitism for that video. Maybe some people disagree with you, said, oh, you're wrong here. We're not going to face anti-Semitism here. But if you're debating the 48 War and you say something people disagree with, it's going to be all hell breaks loose.
I feel like for any of my history content, anything that I make Israel-Palestine, like, it's just the amount of anti-Semitism I get in response is like absolutely insane. Even when I did an entire stream on the Palestinians' perspective of 1948 and what they call the Nakba, right? And I talked about like the specific crimes and like specific war crimes that happen in each village, and which is something that I wish Palestinians would talk about more, about specifically about things that happened in their past, because I think that's like, I don't know, that's the stuff that really makes my heart go out to them. And as a Jewish person, I really identify with those struggles, right? And so so it should be on their side, but I'm still getting tons of anti-Semitism, like as a consequence of that, because I'm just like, it's not enough that like, it's just never enough. And I think I've learned that as a Jewish person that like, no, like I actually think that if I called Israel like a Nazi state, I don't think it would be enough for a lot of those people. Like there's just, and I think it's something that Jews, we have to understand, especially for those who are like more lefty Jews, that like, there are just some people like that are just never going to accept us, and you just need to accept that, and it sucks, but there are people that I think we can change their minds of, and I think that there are people, especially on the left, that I think have really good hearts, and they've just kind of been given inaccurate information, or they just haven't even been told our stories. And I think if they hear more stories, they're more likely to start to understand and start calling out that stuff when it happens. But yeah, thank you so much, Venya. I appreciate that. And if you have anything that you want to advertise or something like that, as long as it's within TOS, feel free to put it in chat. But yeah, thanks for being brave and talking about your experience and stuff. I think that was cool. Anyways, let's talk. I want to watch this video of Merrick, okay? An infamous Merrick. And so she was recently accused of both racism and anti-Semitism because she got
about something that.
So let's watch the clip and we'll judge. Okay, we're going to judge.
So this latest round of Vosh drama has me thinking about something that I think that the left, especially the online left, does a very poor job of handling. And that is uncomfortable narratives and uncomfortable facts. Now, for the longest time, it was the left who did the good job of handling these things. Today, I have two examples in mind. One from the debate itself, which is the overrepresentation of Jewish people in certain industries, and the other is the FBI crime statistics surrounding rates of Black American crime versus their percentage of the American population, or 1350, which you're probably more familiar with. So this latest round of
so sus. Okay, so on Twitter, on TikTok, so they're already just watching this. You don't even need to know that this is a dishonest clip, but just watching this, you can already see it's cut in like really sketchy ways. Like really, like there are things that just make no sense. Like either Merrick really sucks at editing, or there's something sketchy going on here, right? And guys, let's not be rude, like about Merrick's appearance. It's like not cool. Okay. What do you think about what Vosh said about Jewish bankers? We're gonna watch the clip. So Okay, this has 102K views. 102,000 people watch this. That's crazy. Holy shit. So let's watch the entire clip. I think I've got this one. We'll make a judgment.
Wash drama has me thinking about something that I think that the left, especially the online left, does a very poor job of handling. And that is uncomfortable narratives and uncomfortable facts. Now, for the longest time, it was the left who did the good job of handling these things. Today, I have two examples in mind. One from the debate itself, which is the overrepresentation of Jewish people in certain industries, and the other is the FBI crime statistics surrounding rates of Black American crime versus their percentage of the American population, or 1350, which you're probably more familiar with. I'm seeing a lot of people very mad at Vosh for acknowledging the former, which to me is very strange, because the entire point is that, yes, that is a real fact, but it's not a bad thing, and it's not a justification for anything. And we need to be able to talk about these things, why they are the way they are, and be able to counter and dispel the conservative narratives that spring up around these facts. It's very surreal to me that we're seeing people accused of using Nazi talking points.
Okay. Breathe through your nose. So I just want to, Armin Wikai, right? The idea that Jews are actually a group of privileged people. And I know you don't realize this, and you might not attend it, right? I don't know what's in your heart, but you're actually participating in an anti-Semitic narrative. That is the idea that Jews are this incredibly privileged group. That's actually the part that's historically always been the case of how they've justified hate towards Jews. The Germans thought that Jews were particularly privileged. The Christians thought that Jews were particularly privileged. Right? This has always been like a way to justify Jew hatred. So just know that. Now, I'm not assuming that that's what's in your heart, but if you actually look at the statistics, Jews are actually right now have the highest, they are the largest target of hate crimes in the United States, which says a lot because they are the most privileged in the United States compared to Jews in other areas of the world, right? And remember that I said compared to other Jews in the world, right? America is a very good place for Jews in comparison. But even in the place that they're doing so well in, they still have the highest amount of hate crimes perpetuated against them compared to any other group, right? And that probably really surprises you because our media doesn't talk about it. You never see people talking about, how often there are hunting, where people are hunting for Jews to stab them, and how common anti-Semitism is, because it's just not something that people give a shit about. And the reason for that is probably some anti-Semitism that's inherent in our society. So I just wanted to address that, right? Anyways, continuing with Merricks.
For attempting to challenge other people from an anti-fascist perspective to explain why these...
Okay, so I just want to respond to Merrick in some ways. So first of all, I don't know. I haven't seen the clip of what Vosh said, so I'll have to watch it to, I have no clue if he was inaccurate in some ways or if he was accurate, blah, 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 right? He has said some sus things in the past, right? But I know he's been really good about improving his rhetoric. The thing, when it comes to over-representation, this is just an objective fact, right? That is particularly Ashkenazi Jews. Now remember, the majority of Jews are not Ashkenazi, right? But the majority of Jews in America are Ashkenazi, so a lot of people have this idea. And Ashkenazi, if you don't know, it's European, right? They're white-looking, basically. So people often have this idea that all Jews are like that. That's not necessarily true. But there is an overrepresentation of Ashkenazi Jews in certain areas, right? Historically, particularly in the medieval period, there was an overrepresentation of Jews in money lending, right? People say banking, right? But it's It was a specific type of banking, which was money lending, and there were historical reasons for that, and it was usually because of anti-Semitism. In both Islamic societies and Christian societies, Jews were treated as second-class citizens, where they were not allowed to practice law. They were usually not allowed to be in the government. They weren't allowed to even be doctors. Jews were actually banned from even entering Harvard, I think up to the 1950s or 1960s. I forget the exact year. Harvard in the United States. That recently. That's kind of crazy, right? So Jews were often forced out of and forced into certain professions, and thus especially Ashkenazi Jews would often, I guess just naturally in a culture, they would start on average being in certain areas, right? So they historically were in money lending. Now, Jews are not, to my knowledge, Jews are not overrepresented in banking or money lending today. That's a historical thing. That's not something that's common today. I would have to double check that. And a lot of ideas of where Jews are overrepresented is actually completely incorrect. So people have this idea that the Jews are overrepresented in the media. This is not true. And so if you look at there's often like this meme that kind of goes around that Jews are that like every single owner of major media corporation in the United States is a Jewish person. This is not true, right? I'm pretty sure Irish people are overrepresented there. Almost all of those organizations are not owned by Jews. They will often bring up any Jewish person that works for them and then like use them as the owner, even though they're not. Which is wild, right? But yeah, Jews are overrepresented in certain areas for sure. I mean, it just works in general for any cultural group. But as Merrick mentioned, and I think rightly so, it should never be a way to justify discrimination against them. So I think that's a good point, right? I understand it's like a touchy subject because so often the overrepresentation thing is used as a way to justify bigotry against us. So I get why people are sensitive about it, and I understand why people are upset. If Vosh said that, I understand where that anger comes from. Because we're so sensitive to that stuff because it's so often misused. But I haven't seen what Vosh said about it, but so far I haven't really seen anything that Merrick said that is like super inflammatory or anything. I understand the sensitivity with the overrepresentation, but like it is an important part of the equation, and it's an important part of talking about where anti-Semitism comes from. But you've definitely got to be careful with your words and make sure to kind of put in caveats of where there's false ideas of representation, right? Especially with something like the media. Like the Jews just do not control the media. Like that's a total lie. Jews are not controlling banks. That's a lie that comes from when Jews used to be very common in money lending in Europe. So it's like, and that's not the case anymore. So it's just important to kind of put in these caveats. So that would be like my constructive criticism to Vosh or Merrick, to kind of like add that into your rhetoric. Though I have a feeling that Twitter, who loves Jews, right? I have a feeling that they would probably just edit that out anyways. But so I don't know if it would even be worth it. So let's just continue with that.
Narratives that people spin are like not actually justifications for treating groups of people poorly. This seems counter to everything leftists are supposed to believe. If I said to you that the reason why Black American crime rates are higher proportionally than you would expect is because of hundreds of years of slavery, oppression, economic racism, environmental racism, structural racism, all of these.
This is something that I remember, like, it's something that Lindsay Ellis brought up, and I think that was totally legitimate, is how often what's fashionable on, like, the left today, especially, like, the online left, you don't really see it as much in person, is how much it's so focused on tearing someone down for their bigotry, or for, like, or even just blind spots. That's what I'll call it, blind spots, right? Any blind spot that someone has, and God knows we all have plenty. I know I have. And they're so focused on tearing someone's blind spot, like tearing someone down for their blind spots, instead of thinking about like the systems and that have contributed to those blind spots, right? And I think it's because we feel so much more powerful, and it's so much easier to just tear someone down. It's so much harder to like think of all like the history, especially like what Merrick's talking about, like a lot of people, for example, they use Jews as both Jews and Asians as the what's the word I'm looking for? It's the perfect minority. I don't know, whatever they call it. Something minority, the ideal minority. Yeah, I forget the model minority. Thank you. I'm having a brain fart. And they use that as a way to justify, or to argue that there's no kind of systemic racism in the United States, or they're like, well, look at what Jews went through, and look how they've overcome it, right? That ignores tons of Jews that are not Ashkenazi Jews, right? Huge group of people, right? But they're always only talking about Ashkenazi Jews. Interesting. And then, or they'll look at, say, Asians. Why are Asians doing so well? Well, the truth is that there's actually, it's so much more, first of all, there's tons of groups of Asians who come from more poor countries that actually don't do well and actually are in just as much of economic crises, but they don't get talked about as often either. So it's often not really true, but even if it was, right, for the sake of argument, even though bigotry is bigotry takes on different forms and has different effects, right? So the type of what's the word I'm looking for? The type of discrimination against Jews is very different than the type of discrimination against Black people, right? And it takes on different forms, and it has different elements. And it's the same thing that the discrimination against Black people in the United States is different than the discrimination against Black people in Canada. And you see that reflected in numbers, right? And it's interesting, just look at numbers of statistics for Black people in Canada compared to the United States, right? And it's very much it's not a coincidence, right? It's just not happenstance, right? This has to do, and Merrick's completely correct, this has to do about the history of how Black people were treated in the United States. And you can actually pinpoint, I'm not an expert on this subject, but you can pinpoint specific legislation that led to certain situations of of ghettos and all these setups of what's happening in the United States. So it's I wish it was so much more socially acceptable to talk about that stuff instead of just someone just being clip-chimped like this and immediately being, well, they're just, she said 1350, she said the meme, right? And it's I understand her frustration. So it's so, and especially you have to be so careful with your language, so often, that it just means that people are terrified to speak on these subjects and to actually talk about serious issues with this stuff, because you're just so worried about, not doing it perfectly or having blind spots as everyone has. And it's very frustrating. And it reminds me of how I bet you Merrick is a leftist, way more left than I am. And she gets so much more hate, all right, and sexism and tons of shit than a typical right-winger. I don't know, someone who's extremely right-wing. I don't know, say a Nazi woman who's famous on Twitter. I don't know, right? She gets tons of more hate. Even though there's one person is a lot more dangerous, right? And I think it's just the people tend to abuse the people closest to them. It's one of those fucked up weird ironies.